I'm fired up today, which is often fun for everyone when I'm fired up. It just, some topics are kind of a little more immediately satisfying than others, you know, and this one really came together big time for me. You guys are actually really lucky, in addition to being wise and industrious for coming on here. You still couldn't guess how incredible this is going to be for you guys. I feel the same way. I'm kind of looking at it, you know, when it doesn't always come together like this, and I tell you when it doesn't. And when the mill's grinding, it doesn't get any better. I appreciate that, Mike. Hey, Joseph, good to have you on here. But yeah, now it's come down to this, and in addition to how much you guys deserve this, you're also lucky because it's really going to be something for your lives. All right. So in terms of creativity, what slide are we on here? All right. So there's a particularly amazing kind of distinction that may or may not come together instantly, but all of this will be pretty accessible, by the way. It's not going to, it'll be profound, but not, it's not going to take a lot of overly deep thinking necessarily. I might get a little more into things in another webinar, but what's going to help us tremendously is, because creativity can kind of mean different things, right? In practice, in like kind of normal life, it often is a word we use when we need something different, or if someone makes something that's kind of different, and we'll say, well, that's creative. But there's also the different usages and meanings are related, right? There's another way that if we can approach life creatively, that sounds like a good thing. If you can approach a conversation or a sales pitch creatively, including while you're there, right? That's a good thing. Even if you were a cashier and you're dealing with somebody talking to you, there's a certain way that they can engage with you creatively without, which is interesting because creatively wouldn't really mean imposing themselves on you, right? Like if you're a cashier, or if you're talking to a cashier, if you kind of make a joke and force the person to laugh at it, whether or not it's funny, that's not necessarily creative, right? That could be more of an imposition, but creative would be more like you're engaged with them in the moment where you're kind of noticing more that might be relevant than what you might otherwise notice on kind of a human level, right? So there's something that's going to tie together all the useful aspects of creativity and creative breakthroughs and innovation, right, and so forth. And as we see it, then we're also going to see how pervasive it will impact us, how pervasively it'll impact us. So what we're going to start with here is understanding creativity in a certain way. We're going to think of it as it involves seeing, all right? That's actually a massive distinction as over time I explain it and it clicks. It's a tremendous distinction. It isn't something so much that you do, we could say that at least the result of creativity involves seeing either a solution to a problem or an opportunity, right? And then a subset of that would be like a response, an action, or having a thought that you otherwise might not have had. That's basically that's innovative or new or special to the moment or worthwhile or whatever. But you're seeing something that you wouldn't have otherwise seen if there wasn't creativity going on, and it's helping you, right? And as soon as we think of it that way, first of all, it's going to tie together the various usages of creativity. It's going to kind of capture the real, like the kind of useful and powerful potential meaning that it can have. It's not that like a result is creative or not so much, just because it's different, but that you, by creatively engaging, will see things that are going to benefit you and other people. And again, it could be an opportunity, it could be an Amazon product or a way to build an Amazon product, right? You could see something in your mind, right? It can involve partners in relationships or business where you spot a person and a way you can work together or a project that you can do. It could be you're spotting an issue that would happen with a product that would mess you up in advance because you engage creatively with planning, right? It could involve, again, spotting like sort of opportunity that you otherwise wouldn't have seen. It could involve enjoying yourself in a particular moment or with an activity that you might not have seen the situation in a way where you'd enjoy yourself as much otherwise, right? So it's going to enrich, and it's going to lead to breakthroughs that can literally kind of make you rich, right? Like if you are able to conceptually spot a product, like for Amazon or whatever, or a service you can, or a way that you can present your service for consulting, or even just a headline or a framing for your product that's especially powerful, or an audience, or a way to reach an audience, right? Like the way I mentioned where Stephen Floyd years ago with a different business noticed that in order to find more prospects for mortgages, for what were they called? Like more like high-risk mortgages, right? Going and he was able to find a way to get in front of people that were looking for credit repair, right? And that audience was kind of ready-made, and kind of there was a way to kind of get in there with an affiliate or a person that could easily already had like a list of that, right? So that was a creative solution to traffic. He saw something that if he didn't see, they would have missed out on a lot of business, or getting that same traffic would have been much more difficult and expensive. So again, creativity in the way that I'm explaining it now, and this what of what it is going to make it so much more easy for us to figure out the blueprint for how to duplicate this regularly. Once we see what it is in this clear way. Again, once we represent creativity in this very accurate and useful way, then we will see, right, much more about, it'll become quite easy, relatively speaking at least, to see how to set yourself up for creativity. And also even that, seeing isn't something that you do in a certain, even without getting too deep about who you are and such, right? It's a creativity we're going to think of in one way kind of analogous to curing yourself, right, of either a broken bone or a disease or something like that. What do you do when that's the case? Your body heals, right, and you mainly want to set it up to heal for you, right? If you thought that you had to like make your bone fuse kind of like directly, like by being aware of it and kind of willing it to happen directly and keeping on top of it, like with focus and so forth, then you would screw up the whole process, right? Or at least you'd either waste your time or get overly stressed and or screw it up, right? When you understand that the body basically heals itself, but that you can make a huge difference in whether it does or block it from healing itself by not getting it set up properly to do so, right? But just knowing that the body heals itself is a paradigm that leads to a lot of the right answers and practices, right? With that, I'm of course using that as an analogy. I'm not sitting here trying to talk about health ever, you know. But you kind of get the idea, right? It's going to be the same thing when we realize that creativity involves seeing something that we didn't otherwise immediately see. That's also going to be useful and impactful, right? Then we can start asking the right questions right away. We start to see, right, that the kind of perhaps the next steps, which we can start to take an inventory of what's going to get in the way of us seeing more of what we want to see, right, regarding a particular issue, right, or situation or person or whatever. And then what's going to help us, right, what's going to aid us in seeing, and what's going to detract. And obviously then we'd want to get rid of any conditions that would detract. And that brings us back to the Ragnarok idea, right? We can remove failure conditions, including not having things that will help us as an is part of failure conditions, right? As I always say. And then creativity will happen automatically, kind of be done for us by our mind and our brain when we attend to the conditions that will allow us to see more and to not be blocked from seeing. And there's some very specific things that, and it's going to be kind of probably appalling. Of course, we've all done the creative process and seen things we wouldn't otherwise seen because of it, but we constantly don't as well, right? We do what I sometimes have called driving in San Francisco, right? Like the idea of if you don't know exactly how to replicate something, then you will do it right sometimes but do it wrong other times. Plus, you can be a lot less stressed because this, when you see how duplicatable this is for yourself, not duplicatable just in the sense of you can do what I do, but in the sense of you can keep doing it for yourself over and over, it will reduce a lot of stress, because a lot of stress comes from feeling like we need to see the answer by a certain time limit, right? Or before something happens, or things are going to be unpleasant until we see the solution or an opportunity, and we're scared it won't happen, right? When we know the structure of creativity and everything that's going on, we won't really need to be stressed about it, because there's a certain amount that's going to be beyond your control. But once you can be controlling what is under your control and realizing what isn't, and you pretty much have it all covered, when you have both those sides covered, you're generally going to not have much stress. Because you don't really, when you're very clear that you don't control certain things, even if it might otherwise have an impact, you don't tend to be stressed about it, right? The stress comes from feeling like you kind of do control it, but then you don't at the same time. You kind of do and don't control something simultaneously. It gives you stress, right? Let me just give a few things as kind of quick examples of what I mean by seeing, or what it looks like when you see something or don't. And this is kind of a, from a moment set aside, weirdly enough, creativity, and we're just going to think about how a person can see more or less from looking at the same thing. So let's say we're taking a look at a chessboard. Suppose we know very little about chess, or we have, suppose we basically don't know anything about chess. Then when you look at two people playing chess, then you might, what a person sees, so to speak, is like two people maybe playing a game, maybe playing a board game, maybe playing something like backgammon or checkers, but we're not quite sure what it is, right? So that's interesting, right? You will look and you'll just see people playing a game. This is going to end up relating to learning over time too, a similar type of thinking. So you actually need the gist of things, and your mind does this. It'll get the gist of something. You actually need that to see the next thing, all right? So if that's the only background you'll have, you'll get that. If of course you're familiar with chess, you might see either now two people actually playing chess, or one's winning, right? Oh, this guy is playing white. If someone asked you later, you might see that one guy was white and one guy was black, whereas another person might not have even noticed that. They might not have saw that because they didn't have enough background built to even kind of notice that kind of thing, right? A person who is a chess master might see how to checkmate the other person in several moves, potentially, or ways that it might go about. They might see the next move to make, right? Are you starting to notice how, again, don't try to relate this to creativity, just kind of notice what I'm saying in a vacuum here. How depending on what's built up in the person's mind regarding that topic, they'll take a look at the same scene and see additional things. And additional is kind of an important word here. Of course, we get that people can see different things from the same, witnessing the same thing. But notice that you can see additional things by having more knowledge or background regarding a particular thing. And I'll show the other examples in a moment, just to explain further what I mean. But what that's going to give us a hint of is that, and it's going to be very freeing and confidence-inspiring to realize this, because I think that we only kind of half or partly, or in some cases very little, but in some of your cases maybe to a decent degree, but not. I think it's going to take a big leap in terms of when we don't see an opportunity or a solution or whatever, we don't realize to a great enough extent that we can see it if we have more just in our own mind built up, that you can build to where you can see. And there's a certain sense as that gets integrated in your understanding, it's a profound realization that, again, I think that people stumble across intuitively from time to time. But when you can do it with clarity and duplicatability and intentionality, where you realize, oh, in order to see this solution, in order to see the Amazon product, like someone could panic and think, well, I can't think of anything, right? And then they might look and they're going to make some other mistakes that I'll point out in my blueprint. But realizing that you build to where you can see, but knowing also how reliable that is, where you don't have to do it in a bit of an overwhelm or panic state or worry that you might not see. Also, you're going to be able to throw away the question of whether you are a creative person, because when you realize it's a blueprint and a process, then like think about if someone sees more like the next move in chess or how to checkmate someone. Why is that? It's not because they're smart in general. It's not because they're creative as a person, right? It's because they specifically have the background, the lattice work. We can almost think of it like building a tower that lets us see more or higher in that one place where the tower is, right? But it doesn't mean that we see higher and more anywhere. It just, we can see it and more when we climb the tower and look there in the tower, right? So you're not like a higher person because you have a particular tower and climb it, right? You're higher relative to the fact in that situation you're higher. You climbed up the tower, so you can see farther, right? You climb up a hill and you can, or the top of a high-rise building and you can see the city differently, right? But that doesn't mean that you're intrinsically a higher person, right? It's just a very simple process of climbing upstairs and looking out a window. And you understand in that case that you can see more of the city if you do that. And if we just kind of have these pointless labels that chunk up, the problem isn't so much that they're a label. The problem is more that they chunk up in a way that is detrimental. When we say, "Oh, you're so smart, you see how to checkmate a person," then we don't see what's really going on, so that we can duplicate it, right? Or, again, as silly as it would be to say, like, "Oh, you're just a high person, that's why you can see more of the city." That would keep us from realizing that we could just climb the same steps ourselves and look out the window. So like with a headline, right, that you're writing, let's say for any kind of web copy or an email or a title of a webinar that you might want people to watch, or just a correspondence with one particular prospect, right, or whatever, as a subject headline still too. Then, now this is an example. I like the headline because as an additional example of what I'm talking about, because now you're seeing it mentally. Right, it's not just that you're opening your eyes and seeing a physical layout, like with chess or an event or whatever situation. With a headline, what you want to do is see a good headline in your mind. And the way that I do that, when I do it, is I start out by not seeing, but then I approach the situation creatively, and I'm going to explain what that means very formulaically in the next slides. But big picture, what I'm doing is I'm building in a certain way, mentally, to where I can then see what the headline is, and it kind of fills itself in and so forth. But I don't just, did I write down? Yeah, I think I wrote on the next slide. It's not just that I scan through a zillion potential headlines, and it's not just that I call up template headlines and see which one I want to copy. I do a different process than that. It's not just seeing what I would normally see if I just look longer. Like, it's not just about looking more. The problem with a lot of Success 101, things like perseverance, focus, and things like that, is that it's not that it's wrong, but it literally ignores strategy. So it's like focus, but focus on what? Right? Persevere with what? With this creative process and blueprint that I'm giving you in formula, and the way I'm representing it, all of it together, you don't just persevere in terms of, oh, I'll know the headline when I see it. You just keep looking at other headlines until you see it. Instead, that would be like trying to see the whole city by staying on the first floor and just staring out the window, right? It doesn't matter how long you look out the window on the first floor of a high-rise building, you're not going to see the whole city. So perseverance and focus aren't going to help you, right? Now, if you persevere in climbing up the stairs, then you're persevering properly, right? And sometimes if people bumble around enough, they end up climbing up the stairs kind of without realizing what they're doing, and then they do see a solution that's new and different and helpful and differently helpful, right? But once you know what you're doing, then it's a lot easier to persevere because now it's represented properly, right? So it's easier to do it without a lot of extra willpower, and you're not going to have to walk around randomly until you happen to randomly walk up the stairs out of, trying something, right? You just immediately walk up the stairs, and then you see the whole city, right? But it's not about how long you look at it on the first floor. And so that's what people do, like with headlines or whatever, or with dating with partners, or looking for business partners, is they'll just try to see more, or they'll try one. If it doesn't work, they'll want the next person to not make the previous mistake, and so forth. But they're not really building to where necessarily if they're doing things wrong, right? Again, they might bumble upon some correct things, but if you're not building your ability to see regarding that topic or situation or issue or problem or whatever that you're doing, then you're not increasing your creativity, and you're not using your perseverance and focus in a strategic way. You're not directing it to where it's going to have the most impact. Strategy involves alternative use of resources, which involves importance and impact, where you need to understand enough so that you direct your resources properly. Again, so perseverance and focus alone is not strategic. There are ingredients that will be obviously helpful if you direct them in the right way. But that means that there's a meta understanding of success and strategy that's going to involve realizing where to direct your perseverance and focus. You only have so much of each, right? And so, so it's going to turn out, by the way, that engaging creatively, that's going to be a phrase that you can use because it's a useful phrase. You like engaging creatively in the moment with a person or with an activity you're doing or with a problem. But and the opposite would be not engaging creatively. People often do not engage creatively. They might think about, but they don't. When you're not being creative, then when you're trying to think, you're not doing anything very effective or useful, basically. Typically, when people try to think, they don't really know what to do, and they don't do something very, very useful, as I said, or very, very effective. So it'll turn out that the formula for creativity will be much the formula for thinking itself in a constructive and useful way. We might need to combine it with epistemology, how to know what's true. They're going to be related. And I'm going to cover that probably after accelerated learning. But because of this creativity thing, it'll help to really get us set up properly for where I'm going to need to cover that. But I think you guys will be ready to be interested in it, or particularly ready. So you're going to want to creatively engage, not just with the moment, not just with your problems, not just with people. You want to do those things too, when impactful, when relevant. But the most important thing is to engage with being able to see better what is important. That is a further angle, perhaps a better way, perhaps an additionally important way, perhaps a way that will really make it click for you, way to explain what I meant by what I was trying to figure out how to explain about paying attention to the goalscape rather than the landscape that I talked about in alchemy. Right, I've referred to this before in previous webinars that I've done after alchemy, trying to further explain it better. But this is going to be particularly helpful when you're creatively engaging with what's going to have an impact, either overall in your life or in the moment, right? If I'm buying something at the supermarket, then there's probably not a lot I can do in those 30 seconds other than just kind of creatively engage, or 10 seconds, whatever, not even 30 seconds, right? For a few seconds, creatively engage with the person that I'm purchasing from, right? I look them in the eye without looking too long, right? But acknowledge them as a person, like in your mind. And I don't like, again, like I referred to earlier, it's not like I impose a joke or impose smiling or a state on the person. By creatively engaging, you're seeing in whatever is going to happen within a few seconds. But still, there's something to that. And it's just like practice, too. And it helps you to see people as people, which is just generally helpful, I think. So I mention all that to point out that impact is relative to the situation. So there might very well, as far as I can tell, there's not much better to do within those few seconds than to creatively engage with the person that you're interacting with, right? When I was doing online dating, then I would, and this gets a little bit into hints of the formula for creatively engaging. But I've mentioned before that I would only chat, like I would do online chat, right? Like ICQ or whatever it was back then. AIM, I think, AOL, Instant Messenger, that kind of thing. But I would do chat, but I'd only talk to one person. It would be common for people to talk to a number of people, but just doing a lot of things and creatively engaging in none of them is not the key to success, right? What I would do is I would creatively engage with one person at a time. I don't mean one person over the course of months or weeks, but just in the moment when I'm talking to them. I would just be talking to one person, right? Chat isn't something that goes on for weeks. It does in one sense, but just a chat, right? So I'm talking to one person at a time, and I'm creatively engaged. A person who's creatively engaged comes across as much more intelligent and is going to feel much more attractive. That it may or might not be slightly more powerful if it's a man doing it, where women like that, it's more important, like the idea of attentiveness might mean even more to women. That may be the case, but it's not really, it doesn't really matter, because a person who's creatively engaged is just going to be more attractive to the gender they're trying to be attractive to, period, right? End of story. And so that's going to help you even if you're already in a relationship. Being more attractive, having them be more attracted to you is going to help you a lot regardless. And it's really going to be great if you're single. I can give you a clue or a hint or just flat out advice. There's a, this will apply to different genders in different ways, but I'll just frame it in terms of men right now. There's a subset of women. There's some number of women, but they exist, and there's a bunch of them. All right, where whoever you are, you'll find something you find quite attractive, right? And they really want a guy who will creativally engage with them sometimes, will basically pay attention in a way where they're engaged, where they're noticing. And again, as I continue, I'm going to show you more of what that means, and it'll make even more sense what I'm saying, what I mean by that. But I'll just use the phrase for now, and then I'll explain as I continue. But so I'm using the phrase with acknowledging that I haven't fully explained it. But if you creatively engage with them, then that's what they've been like looking for their whole lives. And they've rejected man after man. And sometimes these are exceptionally attractive women. And they will be like physically attracted to you. They'll be attracted to you in like in a sense that for all practical purposes will be as if they were someone looking for like a super buff guy, and the guy's really buff, right? But they'll feel that sense of like physical attraction, and you like won't have competition. It's kind of like if you're goth and there's certain girls who are goth, right? As far as I know, I've never done that, but it's kind of its own thing where if you are goth, you're in with those girls in a way the other guys wouldn't be, right? But with goth, you can spot them. With this, you have to kind of find them. But the cool thing is that other people aren't doing this for the most part very well. They just don't understand the creative process very well. They might bumble into it. Some people naturally do it quite well, kind of out of sheer luck. But even those people you'll be better at by really knowing what you're doing and feeling it and living and kind of living your life this way as appropriate. You always want to be creatively engaged. It's just a matter of what you're engaged with in terms of importance, right? But it's a crazy hack when it comes to dating, is that you can just set yourself apart from virtually everybody by doing this. And it's not the way that you wouldn't notice that you're doing it. The way it wouldn't help you is if you don't realize that it's a subset of women. All people will be attracted to it. It'll help you in business. It'll help you with sales. It'll help you all over the place. But it's not going to make enough difference with some women or with plenty of women, right? But with some women, it's going to be like everything. It's just like with voters, right? Voters have various issues. Some have a spectrum of issues. Some care what party, and some have a particular issue that's everything to them. And there's a subset of women where this is like everything, and they don't even know a good word for it. They're going to basically call it intelligence, maybe attentiveness or something. But you do this, and bam, right? And of course, I wasn't here just talking to a young guy, I was using that as a specific example, but this will crush for you in business all over the place, right? It'll always help you, and with some people, it'll help you massively, is the thing. And just because it doesn't help you massively with some people You might not notice right away, remember, but with some people it'll just be the night and day. And the cool thing is you have like no competition with it because people just don't get this. All right. Okay, and so a potential partner. It was my final quick example before I kind of get to this more specific to last two slides. So you can see this either with business or romantic relationships, is where when I found I'm getting kind of caught in between now with kind of referring directly to what's on the next slide. Maybe what I'll do is I will go to the next slide and then I'll use the potential partner thing to kind of explain one of the ideas. Okay, so let's do that. All right, so the fourth slide is going to give you a bit of a 1, 2, 3, 4 blueprint. This third slide is going to set you up with two ideas that can ultimately explain it all. I wrote at the top of the slide. All right, and these will, by getting a sense of these two ideas, then for the fourth slide will really make sense to follow the blueprint, why it works, and it'll be kind of intuitive and obvious once we have these two things, or at least relatively intuitive and obvious compared to if we didn't have this slide here. All right. So the first statement here, there's two ideas. The first idea, first distinction, is, I've already said it, but I just have it clear here on the slide. The ability to see new things must be built. All right. Right, like the ability to look at a chessboard or two people playing chess and see what the next move should be, or see who's winning, or to see ways to checkmate the person and so forth in several moves. How do you see that? You don't do it by being a novice at chess and just staring longer at the chessboard, right? You do it by building up knowledge and experience in the case of chess, right? Depending on the topic, it can take longer or shorter, right? This could take a few seconds in some creative instances, or it can take time in terms of building up knowledge and experience and so forth, right? It just depends, again, on the type of situation and topic and such. But no matter what, it needs to be built. In the moment when you're having a conversation with someone, you're creatively engaging, then the way this works with it being built is you're applying the stuff also on the next slide, where you're kind of unblocking yourself from kind of hearing what they're saying in a certain way. You realize you're gathering sort of information and understanding, having difficulty putting it into perfect words right at the moment. But the principle holds, is where you'll see more in the moment if you're creatively engaging with a person when you're talking to them. You'll see more of the right response, both with words and tone and so forth, and even the type of response, whether they want the problem to be fixed, whether they just want to be commiserated with and say, you understand, and yeah, that sucks, I can't believe that person did that, whatever. You'll have a better you'll see better what the best response is, depending on also what you're trying to accomplish, right? In some cases, you're trying to influence someone and lead them to a certain conclusion. In other cases, you just want to connect with a person, get to know them better, have them like you more, right? Or it might not be fully self-serving. You might care about the person and want them to just feel better, right? Or feel happy about the conversation and feel supported, right? Or whatever. So the right response for the situation and the goal that you have might not be immediately obvious, which is why creatively engaging, right? It might not come to you if you didn't creatively engage, right? It's a little bit circular, but creativity is necessary whenever not being creative wouldn't cut it, right? Whenever what you would see at first glance, right, or without building anything more, if that would be sufficient, then in that case, you didn't happen to need creativity. You might not know that in advance, but that's what I mean by creativity. All the stuff you could see by creatively engaging, which is going to involve something that involves building, but the building, I said this in the first slide, is going to actually be done for you by your mind. We just need to cultivate the right situation. It's kind of like gardening, like with health or with a garden, right? Plants grow by themselves if you create the right conditions and do the right things, right? So creativity and creative engagement is going to function the same way. So the building is going to actually happen for you if you, just like a plant will grow for you, if you cultivate things properly. And the final slide here will be how to cultivate things properly. But the idea that it's built on is this idea that creativity involves seeing, not something else. It's not thinking of something, so to speak, as seeing something. And I don't mean just visually, right? But if you, like with a headline, right? If you're trying to come up with a headline that's going to be effective, to see a headline that's actually effective is what I'm talking about. You see it. You can call it thinking of it, but I'm calling it seeing it because that represents it in a way that's going to be very useful. Okay? Because then we can ask, well, what helps us to see? It's a little bit more vague to ask what helps us to think, right? Seeing is something we're actually more familiar with than thinking. Right? Thinking is kind of a mystery, right? What does it even mean? Does it mean when an idea springs to mind? Does it mean processing those ideas in some mysterious way? You know, and so forth. Seeing is much more accessible to us and a common part of our experience. And seeing something in our mind is easy to understand, I think, right? The headline comes to you. You might refer to it as I thought of a headline, but of course it's reasonable to also call that I saw the right headline. But then the question is, how do you know that you've seen it and so forth? But but one way or the other, you are going to see something new and useful that you wouldn't have otherwise seen because something's going to get built. And as soon as you look at it that way, it's going to all just kind of come together, especially when you combine it with one more idea. Pretty much these two ideas are going to guide us and combine and lead us to the rest of what we need to understand. Oops, I'm missing a parenthesis here. Okay, anybody? OCD there, I took care of that for us. All right, or you. And I wrote it right here. Your mind will do this for you if you tend to it properly. I wrote underneath the ability to see things must be built. So that's idea one, distinction one. Idea and distinction two, I wrote in terms of a simple formula, x plus y equals r. And I'll explain what I mean in a moment, but I'll just read what else I wrote here. In parentheses under that formula, x plus y equals r. And plus is actually the wrong thing. I'm going to put a times. There's no perfect symbol. No wonder I didn't put a times. Let's do x. There we go. Suboptimal here, right? Oh, asterisk. That's why they did that, because of the x's in the algebra. That's why they invented the asterisk. So asterisk is kind of perfect because it also means kind of like is modified by, right? So it's not exactly like they add together. So x and y interact and form r. R is going to stand for result. All right, I'll write that in now. But you can just think of it as r, whatever works for you. Okay, then I wrote know r and y better. So it's going to turn out that in order to see x, so when we see x, x is going to stand for our new idea that we earned, so to speak, by creatively engaging, by doing the creative process. And the way that we are going to define x is that when x interacts with what you already have to work with, what already exists in the situation, and I'll apply that to these tangible examples in a second, then you're going to get the result that is going to be impactful in a good way. All right, we could say the result you want, but to want it, you have to kind of have more idea of what it might be, right? So before we assume that you have a good idea of the result that you want to get, let's not do that. Let's just say there is a result that's going to help you or be a win, right? It's over a threshold where you're going to get a result that is going to benefit you and or the other person, right? Or another person that's involved or everybody or whatever, right? But there's a good result, a good impactful result. And there is the existing situation, and then there is X, something that you saw to add to the situation. So let me give a number of examples, and it'll be kind of easy to see. And then after I give a couple of examples, I'll read the rest of this, what I have underneath. All right. So with Amazon, right, there's an existing market, potential buyers, right, and traffic and so forth, that exists, right? As you know it better, that's going to help you identify X, which we might say is a product that's really going to be good for the market, right? And now this repeats and iterates, right? It might also mean a product plus a whole business system or brand system, including launching and some advertising and some ranking on their organic listing and so forth. So we could say there's kind of a total system involving a product that you can apply to the existing situation of the Amazon marketplace, and not just the Amazon marketplace, but then there's the manufacturing either marketplace or existing or capacity or existence, right? And so there's existing kind of reality, right, what's going on. And then there is something you can mix or insert into that you don't see yet. And then if you see it by creatively engaging, or by getting totally lucky, right? But creatively engaging means you're going to reliably not have to get lucky, right? So X and Y interact, your product interacts with the marketplace, and you get a result that that's going to be helpful and impactful, like making a bunch of money, right? Making a bunch of sales and so forth. Maybe getting good reviews on top of that, increasing the overall value of your brand, because presumably good reviews and sales for one product and more reviews are going to help your overall brand, right? Which can help other products, right? So, and by explaining that about it could be more than just money, then it shows how knowing more about the result you want will also help. So it turns out, and this is, if you can go back over Sun Tzu's Art of War, and you'll see that he basically applies this idea to warfare, or medieval warfare, whatever. So it turns out that as you know the result better, that is going to be helpful and impactful. And remember, this iterates, this repeats. So there can be a result that is going to be helpful, and then there can be another. Like one result that can be helpful is finding a product that, you can combine a product idea with talking to a manufacturer and how to talk to them and how to get them to modify what they otherwise would have made to get a result of a product. Right, and then you take that result, and it might go into, or maybe you figured out that you won't need that, and then you had to apply creativity to getting it made. You figured out you wanted that particular product because of how you noticed the marketplace and how you think it would sell. Give you a result that way. So you can use this on a smaller scale, larger scale. You repeat it to solve issue after issue, or spot opportunity after opportunity, or compound your opportunities, or to take care of the various aspects of your business, or any other part of your life. When I found Greg, when Mike and myself, I didn't find Greg, but Mike, when I had the opportunity to work with Greg, I saw that, right, because there's also lots of other people to see, right, in the world and in business and potentially that we could work with and so forth. But I had a very good idea, and good enough in this case, right, thresholdishly good enough. But I had built a very good idea of Mike and myself, who are already kind of ready to work together and knew how to. So I had a very good understanding of what he could do and what I could do. It wasn't perfect, but there was a lot to it. And I had a good idea of what a business kind of like OMG would look like, right? Like an info business, teaching people how to succeed with making money and so forth, and then with SEO and such. Because I had a clear enough idea of y, which in this formula, x modified by y, x times y, y, which I'm saying is like myself and Mike. And we can include the marketplace and so forth if we want. Again, this kind of iterates on a smaller scale, larger scale, and so forth. And then of the result of a vision for a business, or we could, depending on how I slice or dice this example, I can say the result of making money or whatever. But let's say the result of creating a business that I envisioned. I had I developed a specific enough idea of what a Greg would look like what a kind of ideal third partner that I knew we needed in the first place was a third person to do the kind of thing Greg does overall, like kind of build and maintain a product, basically, right? The training itself. But I saw Greg, not just there he is a person, look, there's a guy there, right? But I saw him as a business partner that would be impactful, right? Like there's one thing to just like see a headline and there's another to pick it, right? And say that's the one, right? So I saw that Greg would be incredibly great for the whole situation that we had, that he'd be just the right partner for us, and therefore to really focus and invest in that. I don't mean we didn't have to invest a lot of actual money, but time and focus and emotional energy and so forth. But what allowed me to see that was knowing why and the result, like R and Y better, until X, Greg in this case, filled himself in. How do you, right? Itself, if I mean like a partner or the rest of our business, and of course himself as an actual person. And then, so now I can continue with what I have in parentheses under this formula, x times y equals result. So again, the point is, it's a simple formula, but the point is that to see x, you don't try to just look at it directly, just like you don't stay on floor 1 of a skyrise, right, or a high-rise building, in order to see the whole city. Or you don't stay at the bottom of a hill or a mountain. You climb up it. Climbing up it, in this case, means you build up more knowledge of the rest of the situation, such as yourself, if you're looking for a relationship partner, and what you need. And your vision for what is going to happen when you interact with that partner and you do something together, what the project is going to result in. The better you know the result, and the better you know yourself, so to speak, in this case, or Mike and myself in this case, and the marketplace perhaps, then X will allow you to see X. And there's no other way you would have seen X. That's the critical thing. You wouldn't see it by just staying at the bottom of the hill and just staring longer, or squinting, or looking harder with more willpower and more focus and more dedication. Oh, and mindset, right? If you have a really positive mindset, again, impact. Positive, proactive mindset is very helpful, a growth mindset and so forth, depending on what you mean by that. But in the sense that if you do something, it can help you. That's the useful thing of a growth mindset. But those mindsets are fine if you direct them in the right place, strategically. But having a very positive mindset, feeling sure, getting yourself psyched to where you're sure you can see the whole city from the ground floor, isn't going to cut it, right? Apply your positive mindset to gaining more of what you know. Now, this is going to lead us to where epistemology is critically important, which of course it is. But the more you can recognize what you know and distinguish it from what you don't know, that's going to be part of the root of the whole creative engaging thing. It's the root of, it's basically your kind of bottom line thing that's going to help you in life, right, is that. If people understood the creative process, then they would have figured out that epistemology was critically important. In other words, how to distinguish between what you know and what you don't. But nobody focuses on that strongly. Nobody directs massive amounts of resources to understanding epistemology. Either pretty much nobody or literally nobody, pretty much, I find. Which proves that they don't understand how creativity works either. Or they would realize that, a critical ingredient is actually epistemology. But you can approximate it for now and do quite well. And then I'll get to epistemology specifically later. In a few webinars, I think, after maybe accelerated learning. Unless for some reason I feel incredibly moved to do it right away. So again, you're building up what you know, and you're going to block yourself if you screw up what I talked about in when I first used the term apotheosis. I called some of my webinars apotheosis webinars. It was after alchemy. It was earlier this year. It was in 2017. That idea, what's the apotheosis idea? It was that your fundamental block in life, that if you overcome, you can do pretty much anything that's already possible, you'll get to it, you'll figure it out. And that is fabricated certainty. Fabricated certainty is what destroys your life. It's like necessary for survival, and then you need to deal with it. But no one deals with it. If you do, you think there's so much that's going to be so much easier for you. And again, I'll kind of get to that more with epistemology. But you let go of fabricated certainty. You can, if you creatively engage with the topic of epistemology yourself, in other words, how to know what's true, how to distinguish what's true from what you don't know, you will figure things out yourself, and you will understand and learn and remember better when I cover it. Right? There's nothing stopping you except for a lack of understanding that I'll try to even get you over on this webinar, where you can creatively engage with epistemology yourself, that topic and that ability and that skill, and it will empower you massively. So what you want to do is build up what you know, and it's very important that you don't block yourself by thinking you know things you don't. Okay, so you build up more of what you know, and that will allow you to see X. Because remember, creativity fundamentally is you're seeing something you otherwise wouldn't have seen that's going to be beneficial and impactful. That's all it comes down to. And you do that by building, and what you're actually building is why, like your knowledge and a better sense of the result you're going for, that you're trying to be creative about achieving. These two, more knowledge of both of these will result in X. You'll build up enough that you will, boom, see X through no fault of your own, other than the fact that you intentionally, or accidentally, but if we're doing it intentionally, then you intentionally built up your knowledge of Y and R. Now, people are constantly saying some version of, I'll know it when I see it. I just got to keep looking, I'll know it when I see it. I'm looking around, I'll know it when I see it. I'm going to tell you this. If you would know it when you see it, you would probably already have it. If you don't have it, I would stop assuming that you'll know it when you see it. It's going to be way too much like staying on the ground floor instead of climbing up to the top so you can see the whole city. So stop with a partner or with a headline or with whatever, enough with, I'll know it when I see it. You'll see it, you'll see X by knowing Y and R. That is exactly the formula. It's exactly the principle, I would say. Not exactly the formula, but that's exactly the principle to seeing it. Is you build up knowledge of the situation, yourself, the topic that you're trying to have a creative breakthrough about, the marketplace. If it's a headline, you might not need to know much about yourself, right? You have to know about yourself when you're picking like partners typically, right? You might not know a little bit about yourself in the sense of it kind of sounding like you, right, with what you write. But other than knowing kind of your voice, perhaps, so to speak, you more want to know the marketplace. You want to know what you're trying to accomplish, but then you want to know the results, and so forth. You want to know more about like what you're talking about, that the headline's about, and what's happened previously with headlines, perhaps, what else they're seeing out there in the marketplace, and so forth. There's even more to it, but that's just an example, so I'm going to move on for this webinar. But it calls to mind the idea that one thing I could potentially do at some point is even fill in more with headlines. Okay, but very important that that you let go of this, I'll know it when I see it, and instead try to know more about Y and R. This is that fabricated certainty that's screwing you up. It's one of many ways that it screws you up, is this idea like, I already can see it, I just need to look around more. The critical distinction, one of the critical distinctions in this webinar is to stop thinking that way, period. Stop thinking that you'll know it when you see it if you just look around more. Stop thinking that just perseverance and focus are going to do it for you. Instead, you need to build up to where you'll see it. That, again, that will be done for you with the right conditions. So let's go to those conditions. All right, so in the blueprint, there's kind of two things to keep in mind, and that'll explain the rest of the blueprint. And I have them on the top line that's underlined. I say what you're trying to do here is maintain importance, because it's all about seeing. There's, in essence, one principle, that you're trying to see something that's useful and impactful that you otherwise wouldn't have seen if you didn't build properly, including building mentally. Or not, I can even phrase it a little bit more helpfully. Instead of saying if you didn't build properly, if you're trying with creativity to see something useful that you wouldn't see if the ability to see that new thing isn't built. So it has to be built. Your mind will build it, just like your body heals itself, and just like a plant will kind of grow itself, so to speak. Of course, God does it overall, right? But there's God follows physical laws, right, and so forth. It's overall very important that God exists. God's awesome. But for this, it's not necessarily a big stumbling block. So putting aside about God ultimately doing things, your mind will do it for you, if just like, again, the garden, just like your body healing itself, if you understand the conditions. But people screw up these conditions. It'll be kind of, if this isn't a little bit appalling to you, then you might not be fully understanding, like hearing what I'm saying. Appalling in the sense that, wow, sometimes you've screwed this up. Definitely you've gotten this right sometimes too. But and it's really nice to now know that it's formulaic and you can just start doing it. Of course, you won't necessarily have it all integrated. Maybe this will hit you so hard that it's like, bam, gets integrated and you just feel it right away. But one way or the other, you're going to start seeing this working because, boy, I can't even tell you. I mean, I apply this in my life and it's ridiculous. Like I just, over and over and over again, I don't see the answer. I know what to do. I create the conditions for things to be built up. Mike and I even have a joking name for it, brilliance on demand, when I do it in the course of one phone call, right? With some things, you don't do it in the course of one phone call. I don't like write a whole sales letter on one phone call or figure out, a new product to do on one phone call necessarily. I might, but if I did, then other stuff probably would have been built previously. But when you know that you go about creating the conditions for things being built in your mind, so you will see what you need to see. And I'll give you one last mental picture before I go on to these 4 things. Think of, again, don't get too much into these analogies, trying to like figure everything out for them, but they kind of help contain the one concept that I'm giving you for. So if you imagine a jigsaw puzzle and you're trying to see where a piece goes, if you build more and more of the puzzle in around it, then you'll see where the piece goes, right? Like you'll see the missing piece, right? By filling in enough around it. Or like even like Wheel of Fortune, right? Where they fill in a number of letters until they guess that's kind of a reasonable illustration, right? Wheel of Fortune, there's like a phrase, right? Like put the cat out or something. I don't know. Probably not that one, but whatever. And then they will pick letters, and if the letters is in that phrase, they reveal just the letters. And then as more letters get revealed, then what happens? At some point of letters being revealed, one of the contestants will see something they didn't previously see, which is what the phrase is. So that, in a little bit of a nutshell, in a simplistic nutshell, shows you the process of you're seeing something you didn't see before, kind of mentally, right? In the case of Wheel of Fortune, what the phrase is. And you reveal until you see. Now, in that case, you're revealing letters of the actual parts of the actual phrase that you're trying to see. In other cases in life, you're filling in details around it, right? Like I didn't gradually see like Greg's foot, or Greg's head, or whatever, or even parts of what he would do for us necessarily. Maybe I did to some degree, but it's by seeing more of what we can do, and then I guess it starts to fill in more of what you need. Yeah, like you fill in more of like the whole situation, or like with the Amazon marketplace and a product that will work well inside of it and potentially sell, right? Then they can kind of fill themselves in together, right? The more you see of the marketplace, the more you might see of what products might, or what particular product, or what type of product, or what qualities of a product might work. And the more you fill that in, the better. Now, then you also might look around stores, and that is different than looking directly at the Amazon marketplace, but you're looking at the marketplace overall. Or you might have a Shopify store and test things on with Facebook ads. All of this will build up your ability to see, just like kind of building a lookout tower that you climb up to see more of the city or more of the surrounding countryside. right? And again, you don't actually do the building yourself. Your mind, which is not quite you, does it. One of the things, if we look at how people commonly talk, is they talk about being creative, like they're the ones doing it, right? But that can be okay as long as it doesn't, you don't represent it wrong. But if people represent it wrong, right, it screws you up. Just like if you thought that you grow a plant by making the plant, it's putting the plant itself together rather than creating the right conditions and letting it grow itself. All right, now let's get to the 4 things in this blueprint. So one of these is kind of a positive thing to do, where you're like acquiring more knowledge and information and angles and perspectives and so forth. And the first 3 are like removing things that'll slow you down or get in your way. Okay. So all these are big. One's not really bigger than the others. But I'll still do it in kind of in order. So the first thing I wrote here is not relying. I put that in bold because relying is kind of important. But you don't rely on hope, or I put a chunked up. I'll explain that in a moment. But relying on a source is a creativity killer. And so what I mean is, if you're looking for a business system to just make you rich, if you're looking for a person to just make you happy, right? What is all the obviously, basic, wise relationship advice is that you need to kind of get yourself reasonably straight, reasonably independent before you can be interdependent, right? In 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, kind of an iconic book that's helpful. Lots of reasonably good ideas in there. One of the things he talks about is you start with dependence in life, and then you graduate to independence, and then you can be interdependent, where you like joint venture and you work with, have productive relationships with other people, where they're not codependent. He says they're interdependent, and there's an intermediate step, which is independence, right? And there's something very true about that, right? Even when I give people business advice, I tell them, like, you definitely want to be partnering or allying with people in various ways, even at least with your customers, but often with other joint ventures or vendor relationships, all kinds of things, affiliate relationships, outsourcing. But in order to do that, you first need to be independent, right? In order to outsource, for example, or hire people that can do stuff, or even partner with people that can do stuff, it helps to be able to do it yourself. If you're not willing to understand how to do something yourself, then you're going to have a hard time seeing someone else that can do it right as well, and you're going to have a hard time communicating with them and so forth. There's just a lot you won't see because you haven't done it yourself. You don't know how hard things are, how long things take, what you have to look out for, where it's easy. People can take advantage of you, right, if you haven't done it yourself, but you'll just basically screw it up in all kinds of ways, in many cases, if you can't do it yourself. Exceptions are things that are done very reliably, probably, right? Like I think of like an autoresponder, or maybe web design, not web design, but certain graphic design, right? You might not know how to draw at all, but someone else might be able to draw. It still might be a lot cheaper if you theoretically could do it, but when do you not need to be creative? When what you see is sufficient to win, right? With what you see, with what you currently have built is enough. Right? If there's a reason why you're looking over the city, then anything that's tall enough, or if you're already high enough to see what you need to see, you're fine. Right? We're trying to accomplish some result here. So if you immediately see X, mix it with Y, like whatever else is going on, and get the result that's good and impactful, great. But and there's plenty of stuff like that in your life, but then of course there's also plenty of stuff that you're not going to see with what you currently have built in your mind and overall in life. And then that's where the creative engaging is going to help, right? But it's specifically for when you wouldn't otherwise see it with what you currently have built. And you might not notice that in the first place, right, if you're not creatively engaged. Including with what's important, right? The highest, best place to overall apply this, you want to apply it all over the place in your life, but you apply this to being creatively engaged with noticing what's important, seeing what's actually important in the first place. That will incredibly increase the quality of your life. right? And your effective strategy is if you're seeing what's really going to be helpful in the moment, overall, as your main priority, and as your priority today or in this hour, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So relying on a source, a great way to illustrate that is, as I was already saying, like with relationships, right? It's kind of iconic, where if you don't build yourself up, I was saying, right? So if you're an entrepreneur, if you think you could just hire a bunch of people to do everything you need, that is likely to fail if you don't have enough understanding to see what you need, right? In terms of people, see who's going to be a good fit for you, who really is going to do a good job, who's going to be reliable, who's going to be long-term if you need that, et cetera. Who's going to be a good personality match, potentially. Or even how to get along with somebody. You can creatively engage in getting along with someone that you wouldn't immediately see how to get along with. But I find it easy to get along with a lot of people. I don't mean have them like want to go have beer with me. I just mean to basically get my alliance to work with with people, right? I don't mean that I'm the coolest guy in the bar or anything like that whatsoever, or the most fun guy to hang out with or whatever. But I can have my alliances, right? My interactions work with people. It's very rare that there's a personality. It happens, as you guys know. Excuse me. Okay. It happens, but it's not, it happens so rarely that it's not much of a stumbling block. Because if you creatively engage, it's pretty easy to get what you want out of someone without manipulating them, but by just finding the reasonable way to talk to them that's going to work to them, the right perspective to look at what they're saying to you that makes it okay, where you're not all, your hair, you're not all, your hackles aren't all up and so forth. 1 second, let me just also blow my nose here. Not sick, that was just kind of a momentary thing that happens. All right. Another example that's kind of different that springs to mind is, maybe this is a bit my opinion, but I don't think so. It's pretty relevant to me, actually, I think. Like the way that Christians, and I'm a Christian, so that's why I use Christianity, but the way they kind of look that, like in the future, God's just going to fix everything. Right, Jesus will come and bam, it doesn't really matter what the heck we did as long as we went to church and accepted him in our heart or whatever. There's a way that gets people to check out creatively, right? One thing we know for sure is that nearly every Christian is basically totally fine with extortion, right? Obviously what it's framed in terms of government. And so I think, why? Like, how is that possible? So there's something that's blocking them from just like seeing that. And I'm not, when I'm using these examples, I'm just trying to illustrate what I'm writing here on the screen. I'm not trying to talk about health or Christianity or gardening or whatever, but it's just an example that comes to mind for me. Whereby there's a way that I feel like many Christians just kind of check out creatively in a certain way. They don't tend to express the idea of winning like I do, where everyone is good, right? Everyone's happy and we get rid of bad ideas. There's a way that they're not creatively engaged enough to come to that conclusion or to go that far with things. Overall, Christians are good people. They do a good job. There's a lot of good nations, built on, relatively speaking, built with that majority and so forth. So I'm a big fan of it, relatively speaking, just like I'm a kind of a fan of America, relatively speaking, but there's a lot of major issues with it that I have as well. But it makes people check out, like, creatively. And by check out, I mean, like, take off, right? Like, not show up. When you think that a source is just going to come and take care of it. Another different example is if you're reading a detective novel and you know that Sherlock Holmes is going to give you the solution at the end, or whoever whoever the guy is, or you're watching a TV show, there's a way that you don't really try to solve it, right? And not that often you can't because they don't give you enough information, right? They kind of cheat, like the author kind of cheats. But it just illustrates more of what I mean, is when you think that a source is just going to come and take care of it for you, including that you're just going to meet a partner and bam, you're just going to become rich because you're working with someone, right? Or you're going to get a relationship partner that's going to make you popular, or it's going to make you happy, right? Or even marriage as a source, right? People think, oh, if I get married, then I'll live happily ever after, right? I am extraordinarily happy in my marriage. But part of the reason why is I don't check out because we're married and therefore everything's already fine, right? There's a way that you need to creatively engage in order to feel optimal, as happy as you could and really excited about your partner and so forth. It often devolves for people where they're like, oh, I love them with all my heart, they mean so much to me, but in practice they're not excited, right? But I feel excited and that's more fun. So those are a whole bunch of examples where if you rely on a source is going to save you or help you, and this is very much related to I'll know it when I see it. You see, it's like all of this implies what? That nothing has to be built. Do you see? Remember, I already gave you the two principles. These are just this is just a formula that helps you to create the conditions to take advantage of the two principles on the previous slide, which was the ability to see new things must be built. And then the more you understand the result you want and the environment, the relevant environment, then the more the more you've built. This is what needs to be built, Y and R. Understanding of Y and R get built, basically, and then you see X, the new thing that by creatively engaging, you see. So when you rely on a source, including yourself, you're implying that it's already built, so your mind doesn't build anything, you see? In other words, you're not creatively engaged, or the result is you're not creatively engaged. Or if someone says, oh, I hope I'll make a bunch of sales, or I hope this business idea will work, or I did my Amazon listing, I hope it'll work, right? When you're hoping, when you're hoping in a way that's this reliance, and just check. If you're feeling hope, then just check, is this causing me my mind to not feel like it has to build? Am I just sitting back and hoping? Right? I hope this sales presentation will go well, right? Whatever that is, if it's diminishing the sense of importance that your mind has to building, to see more about that topic or situation, or the solution or whatever, opportunity, then that's bad. By chunked up, I mean like a source as is. Of course, in a relationship, business, or romantic, you rely on a source can help spark things for you. Even same thing with reading books about stuff, right? Even with me, right? If you rely on me as a source where you're passive and you want me to do something to you, then that's not very effective. You need to creatively engage with my webinars and pretty much anything that you're trying to learn, probably especially with mine. But when you creatively engage, you learn much more effectively and quickly. There's some more accelerated learning for you. And you get it in the first place. You literally won't see what I'm talking about in this case. With simpler topics, you'll see you'll understand in the sense of seeing what the person means, but then you won't remember. It won't get integrated if you don't creatively engage with learning. With what I'm talking about, you won't apply it or even understand very well in many cases. What I'm saying, if you don't creatively engage, if you rely on me in the source in the way that I mean, if you hope that this webinar that I listened to from David is going to do it for me, right? There's a different, slightly similar meaning of hope that's don't you have to get paranoid about hope? I'm not saying hope is bad. What I'm saying is relying on it in a way that gives you closure, keeps you from building, right? Closure, I have list number 3 here. But if it's interfering at all with the creative process, then it's not helpful. So instead of needing my webinar to do it for you all by itself, that's what I mean by chunked up. It's like one big chunk. Chunking it down can be creative. Developing people, including with relationships, it can be helpful. Obviously, you need to meet an actual person to have a relationship with, like business or romantic, right? So, and that person you could think of as a source, and I'm not saying like don't meet a person, of course, that's nonsense, right? If something I seem to be saying is just utter nonsense, and that's a good clue that you need to creatively engage with it and chunk it down and figure out what I mean, right? But it becomes pretty obvious when you apply this to relationships. You want to figure out how to interact with a great person, right? There's, like, I didn't just look at Greg to save us, right, as like our savior. I creatively engaged with Greg to figure out how do I put him in the best position to thrive in the way that will, be part of the business that we need, right? How do I get to know him better so I interact with him in a way that's nice for him, right? So I'm not looking for him to just save me in a vacuum, right? So another way to put it is like a savior, but it's not just a person. That's why I also said source. It's not just the book that's going to teach you about, how to lose weight or whatever it might be, or the program that's going to make you rich. You need to creatively engage with it by chunking it down. But chunking it down, let me give you another thing to avoid, related, is the idea of golden nuggets. What does it sound like if I say, what that I just recently said on a different slide? If I say, oh, I'll maybe get a few golden nuggets from David's webinar or from this course. In practice, again, that might kind of be true and okay, but there's a way that can be very unhelpful because what does it sound like? It sounds like I'll recognize it when I see it. How do you know it's a golden nugget? You see, you're assuming as soon as it's a golden nugget, you'll identify it as a golden nugget and use it. You see, so you might need to process what the person is saying. You might get a course. I sometimes read books and they say ridiculous things, but that sparks something for me, right? So it's a little bit more like raw material to help you to see more, to notice more, give you different perspectives, right? Something can be very right and help you to know more. Something can be very wrong and help you to see more. Right, so you're looking to chunk things down, to kind of delve into things in a certain way where you're not assuming you'll know it when you see it, including golden nuggets even. You see? It's like related to the alchemy idea, right? You want to be engaged with something so that with books and courses and life, people, so that you develop them or develop with them. Or again, it's not that it might not be a golden nugget. It might be lead that you turn into gold, or it might be silver that you take and you spend and you exchange it for gold, right? Of course, I'm being metaphorical, but it kind of gives a sense of what I mean. You can develop and process. And again, it'll happen automatically if you don't get in the way, is what I'm saying. So you'd say, how do you develop and process? It'll be done for you if you don't get in its way by looking to have it all be one chunk. Don't see a person as defined already. People can be developed. People can be interacted with in different ways that are all fine to you. But if you didn't see it, if you didn't look for it, then you look for it, and it's super easy. A few things are important to a person to do and not do. That all might be easy if you see them. If you don't see them, the person seems difficult, impossible, pointless, useless. You put yourself in a situation to see. It's a few things that are important with the person that you do, and also that you avoid. There are a few things that they'd rather you don't do with them. And if any of them are just impossible for you, then you move. Don't do it. Don't get involved deeply with that person. But in so many cases, it's easy, especially once you feel like you really recognize that it's important to the person. It makes it even easier often to do or not do those things. And then all of a sudden, you get everything you want and more from the person, and it's easy. But you had to engage creatively to figure it out. Okay, so critical to not block things, right? You're dead at the starting gate with these if you don't avoid these first three things. And I watch people running into this all the time. Okay, second one's pretty self-explanatory, happily, right? Been doing a lot of explaining here nonstop. Decluttering, right? Decluttering immediately probably becomes pretty obvious once we realize it's all about seeing. If your life is cluttered, if I'm talking to 5 people at once, am I going to see in my mind a response that comes across as engaged, clever, intelligent? Am I going to be able to carry on a conversation in a way that's witty and interesting with a person? I won't see a lot because my my mental field of vision, so to speak, I'm just being simple there when I say that, is clutter, right? It's pretty obvious once you look at it that way. But people clutter the hell out of their lives, their mind, and so forth nonstop. And they get chaotic clutter back out, worries and repetitive thoughts and so forth. I wish, I don't know what it's like, I'm sure it's a whole spectrum with you guys on how it's like in your head, but I just really don't have repetitive or negative thoughts. It would be kind of shocking, I think, if you could live in my mind for an hour a day. I'm far from perfect, right? But compared to the past and compared to what you read about other people and statistics, I constantly have new thoughts, and I don't really worry particularly about stuff. And if I do, I can generally dissolve it. But it's not a lot of repetitive stuff. And a big part of that is the decluttering, right? How do you declutter? Well, you can start with your life as a whole. A major source of clutter for people is their family. Now, that's just reality. You need to face it one way or the other and deal with it. You need to stop thinking that you're going to have enough creative breakthroughs to get rich. And you're going to need some creative breakthroughs of your own to apply it to your own situation. You have to engage creatively. Even with a course as awesome as what we have at OMG, you have to engage creatively to enough that you win. But to get rich, you're going to have creative breakthroughs. I mean, rich, right? You probably provide for yourself regardless, or else everyone would starve, right? Not all you guys, I mean everyone in the world. And then you've got to face that. Well, here, let me give you an example of clutter. See, clutter messes with your sense of importance. Let's say you have an issue that you're working on, and then you go and talk to your spouse or a child or mother or brother or whatever, and they're talking and talking. They're not engaged with your particular issue related to SEO consulting, right, or Amazon or whatever, right? So they're just naturally not going to be into that and talking about it. Not because they're bad people or stupid or irresponsible. There's just how are they possibly going to be into that, right? So they're just going to be talking to you, and whatever comes out of their mouth is going to imply that, let me back up. Let's suppose that you take a look at your life and you think, all right, it's going to have a significant impact for good in my life if I get wealthy. I'm not saying this is true, I'm just saying, let's say you decide this. This is all reasonable. I'm not saying it's true, but it's at least reasonable. And then you say, in order to get wealthy, the next thing that's going to have a big impact is if I figure out a good Amazon product. Again, I'm just picking an example. Of course, there could be different routes that people follow. But let's say you say that. That's all reasonable, right? And that'll apply to some of you. That might not do it all by itself, but it's going to be one of the ingredients for making you wealthy. Let's say I'm stipulating this. Again, of course, someone can get wealthy without doing Amazon, or whatever, theoretically. Although for some of you, it's the path that's going to be the one, right? We have different kind of things that really are going to work for us. Okay. So want to get wealthy, then just Amazon product. So you want to see something regarding an Amazon product that you don't see immediately, right? You want to have a creative breakthrough. That, by the way, might involve not just a mental process. Of course, it might involve having an idea, trying it, learning. Because of that, learning is not exactly the right word. It's decent. But what's really happening is something's going to get built from that if you don't block it. If you follow this blueprint and you don't block it, then whatever you do with a product with Amazon, you're going to see more for the next one, unless it's blocked, okay, by messing up some of these things. Like, for example, if you're looking for the product to do it all by itself without having a process that goes with the product. And you just want that product to save you, right? Or if you limit yourself to a particular even product niche, it might not be the one that's going to work for you, right? And if the niche is like a source, right? And whatever kind of keeps you from building where you need to build. I said I'm going to back up. And so you decide that you want to figure out a good Amazon product that's going to either be a good first try or ultimately get to one that's really going to work. It might be the first one, might be the third one, right? Often it's the second one for people, specifically, just with Amazon. A lot of people, that's kind of how it goes, second one. So now let me point out something else about importance and your mind and building and seeing, suppose you were to walk into a party and you spend an hour there. There's going to be a whole bunch of things that you possibly could have seen, not that you should have seen, but that you theoretically could have seen. I might not be able to tell you one pair of shoes that anyone's wearing. I didn't notice any of them, for example, right? I might not have noticed business opportunities. One person might see attractive women. Another person might see men that look buff, even if they're a man, because they're thinking about fitness. And they're like, oh man, I want to look like that guy. They're not because they're attracted or not, but just because they want to look like that. Others might see business opportunity, right? But not see other things. Some might see fashion. Some might see friends or social opportunities. Others might see that they don't want to go to a party like that again because they found it boring, right? So they see some things and totally don't see others, and why? Now, part of it you could say, well, it depends what they have built in their mind, sure. But there's a second major factor, and that is, and it's related, they kind of are inextricable, they're intertwined, is what your mind in particular thinks is important, including at that time and that place, right? You need to confront the fact, I've referred to this before, but it's a very important idea for like learning and creativity and so forth. So with something we kind of don't, it's not like immediately obvious to people often, there's so much stuff that we could potentially notice. Our mind filters out the majority of. Depending on how we look at it, we could even say that our mind naturally filters out 99% of what we theoretically could think about, associate, experience, notice in a particular situation. Right now, you could be thinking about like pretty much an unlimited number of things. You could be thinking about the next video game you want to get, the last interaction you had with a person, thing you want to do to make money, how to rank a website, what TV show you watch, right? It just goes on and on. So your mind is actually not having you see basically an unlimited number of things right now. So by default, you don't see like everything. Physically, it feels like you see almost everything because you open your eyes, you look around, and it's like you see almost everything. So it feels like the default is you pretty much see whatever unless you're blind, your eyes are closed, or sometimes you're like, how could I not have seen that, right? But conceptually, and a lot of creativity involves conceptual, right? It's not just seeing visually in front of you, right? That's a small part of what you see generally, in the way that I mean see, right? So much of it is mental. And so practically speaking, we're talking about creative engagement. You're seeing what to say, you're seeing an idea, a product idea, you know, a business opportunity or an aspect of an opportunity or an idea for your business of some sort, or you're spotting a person or what just that might be beneficial or a way you can interact with people. So there's so much you could see once you realize that conceptual is part of seeing in the way that I'm talking about it. So the default is actually that you don't see stuff. That's critically important. As soon as you make that shift in our thinking about creative engagement, creativity, by default you won't see stuff. Now there has to be a reason why you see something rather than a reason why you don't. Okay? And so it's going to come down to what your mind thinks is important, right? During this webinar, you probably did, nearly all of you, or maybe all of you, did not think of a headline to put somewhere, right? And I could go on. I could list 100 or 500. I could probably list 1,000,000 things if I kept going long enough, right? Of things you didn't think about during this webinar, right? So given the situation, the time, the place, the overall situation, the specific situation, so forth, your mind determines what's important, and that determines what you see. So if you want to have a creative breakthrough, which means seeing something that is relevant to a specific issue, either an opportunity or a problem or a solution, or whatever, or even that there's a problem with something, which is a first step in spotting a solution, right? Then that thing needs to feel important proactively. You're not going to see what's important, so you're not going to be creatively engaged with importance itself, which is the starting point, which is what I said I kind of focus on the default, which is awesome. When you're thinking defaults, not to worrying or repetitive thoughts, my thinking, the reason why I don't have really negative or repetitive thoughts is that I'm realizing this as I'm speaking. It literally defaults to thinking about what is important in the sense of what could I think about or attend to or be creatively engaged with that would have impact, the most impact or at least a lot of impact or, reasonable impact, What would be impactful? The reason I don't say what would have the most impact is to do that, you'd have to like be aware of like everything you could possibly be aware of and compare them all. So it's not exactly the most, but implicitly the most in one sense, but ideally like the most, but at least that would be impactful, right? So I actually default to that instead of repetitive thinking or negative thinking or just replaying events in my head that people do, right? They must, because that's what a lot of people's conversations are about, events, like describing events that happened recently to them, which isn't really going to have much impact in most cases. If it's specifically part of an overall thing that you're trying to have a breakthrough about, then that's fine. But typically that's not it. People just default to that sometimes. And you're really not going to make your life better that way compared to if you default to creatively engaging with what would have impact if you were to think about it. And then you engage creatively with what you decide is important. So either you're working on something that you decided is important, or you're not, in which case you're thinking about what would be important to think about, or to focus on, or to get involved with, or get your environment, surround yourself within your environment, right? It's not, I don't just sit in a blank room and think, right? You do stuff with your body, you have an environment, you can travel and go somewhere, even to Starbucks, right, or whatever. You take a walk. So I'm literally always thinking, except for perhaps this doesn't happen sometimes during my day, but basically I'm thinking about something, I'm creatively engaged in something, or I'm thinking about what to be creatively engaged with that would have impact. And as that iterates, then what I'm creatively engaged with generally has some sort of impact. It may or may not be directly saving the world, but at least I'm enjoying myself and so forth. And of course I do devote plenty of time to working on my plan to save the world, which involves figuring this stuff out, figuring out how to express it and share it, building up other people that know it and interacting, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so you can see how clutter will screw with all of this. And so clutter in terms of just interacting with people that are going to be talking about, or even if they're not talking, whatever they're doing, they're not creatively engaged. If they're near to you and they feel like a peer, and they're not creatively engaged in the thing that you supposedly want to be creatively engaged with, including thinking about what's important to be creatively engaged with in the first place, right? People don't do that either, right? The people around you, see if they're purposefully creatively engaged with thinking about what would be important to be engaged with. They're probably not. They're not engaged with thinking about epistemology either, right? So lo and behold, we clutter ourselves up. Our mind, by default, if you don't do this on purpose, what our mind will do is it'll go and figure out what's normal by looking at your peers and the people around you mostly, your environment too. But it mainly, with the environment, it still thinks about what people are doing. Even if, what I mean is, even if there's no people around, if there's a lot of litter on the ground, it'll think that it's more normal to litter, right? You'll feel less compelled to not litter or whatever. So you have someone in your family who's not creatively engaged in what would be helpful for you. They're implying to your mind that what might be actually important isn't, right? So that's true. That's real. So you just need to deal with it in some way. I have a family. Okay, I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but I do not think that if I'm interacting with them, like, that it's not taking me basically backward with, literally backward from creative breakthroughs about what I otherwise would be working on. Ways to deal with it are certain, like ways you can quarantine, where you like have an idea, this is family time, I'm doing that, I'm engaged with that, right? Interestingly enough, I would say that by creatively engaging, such as when you're with your son or daughter, which I find that people don't do that much as well, especially since the iPhone came out, right? They do to some degree, but mostly they're not creatively engaged. Even if they're not on their iPhone, they're projecting. Do we want to keep this on? This relates to closure also, but they already think they know what's good for their kid, and they're not creatively engaged with what their kid's thinking, what the kid's feeling much, and what would mean, like, how the kid wants to be communicated with, right? often you can get a child's attention by starting with where they're at and talking about that for a second and then transitioning into what you want to talk to them about, right? When it's the right time, and you get a feel for when it's the right time if you're engaged. So even if they're not cluttered, they can have closure in the sense that they think they already know what's best for their kid, and they project that on the situation. They don't creatively engage. If you creatively engage with your family when you're there, then it can actually help your overall sense of creatively engaging. It's like if you're kind of a little bit doing business, when you are engaged with your child, it can actually reduce your creative engagement and breakthroughs with business overall. It can actually be negative. Like so, I'm with my son for an hour, let's say, theoretically. If I'm doing a little bit of business stuff while I'm there, then it kind of implies, like, then the category for my mind when it comes to determining what's important to it is like business is like kind of important. You know, like it's like if I'm fully not doing business and totally engaged in one thing, my mind doesn't use that time to decide what's important to work on overall or with business, weirdly enough. So it actually helps you quarantine, compartmentalize, categorize. I don't actually have, like, personally, I don't have like scheduled stuff that much. So it's not like I schedule 6 to 7 to be with my son. For me, I don't like that. But when I am with him, I'm creatively engaged. Now, however, I would do even better and make more money if I did not creatively engage in my family hardly at all. And I actually did just that in a few years of building OMG. I would say for the first 3 years of OMG, I purposefully, in essence, didn't do much creative engagement with my family, including my wife. And I really, and she was pretty much supportive of it. She was supportive of that, very much supportive of it. I spent time with her, and I spent time where I was just with her and not doing other stuff. But there was still a way that business was kind of an overall priority even when I was with her. And there were times when I said, I can't, like, think about what you want to talk about right now. My mind's too wrapped up, like, with business. And in order for me to think about it, I would have to detract from the creative tension and creative engagement of business in a way that would have an impact. The thing is, what people try to believe, and therefore do believe, because people believe what they want, typically, what they want to believe, is that they can do both. If you creatively engaging with your family will significantly diminish your ability to creatively engage with business and work, period. End of story. There's no way out of that. You may succeed anyway. You'll certainly can succeed to some degree without it, but it will be harder. There's things you won't spot. You won't be on par with people that are fully creatively engaged with their business and so forth. And so that's that. And so you can also think about how you want to order things, right? Now that my son's a little older and I'm wealthier, then I intentionally know that I'm sacrificing creative breakthroughs of business. There's just all kinds of things I otherwise would have noticed and would have gotten other people to notice and made happen in OMG. I don't really cut corners on your guys' content, just, but just in terms of other stuff, in terms of traffic and whatever. And now I creatively engage and have plenty of breakthroughs, and I could justify to myself and say, oh, I'm doing all this great stuff, and I am. But I said in advance, I knew this a year and a half ago, that I was reducing my level of creative engagement from like full on, period, end of story, and I knew it would have an impact. And in one sense it does, like, overall, kind of with the overall, like, what needs to happen and what is happening is a new structure and system has to get built where there's an additional level with other people that gets built up and so forth. I don't often like to use, like, who I'm working with in the business as an example, but just in a vague way. But it's fascinating because I thought, like, I knew it would make a difference, and most everyone else would deny it. But I know how this works, or I have a certain model that constantly overlaps with reality and also makes sense based on these principles. It's just reality. There's a way that I was fully balls to the wall, creatively engaged for a few years, in a way that if I'm not going to do that, it's not going to have the same effect. Period. even if I can talk about, wow, I figured out products, all these conversion things, I can do a huge list of things that I have figured out over the last year and a half and worked on and had breakthroughs that other people didn't and wouldn't. But it still would be, the business itself could be, it wouldn't be better. It wouldn't be better as a customer necessarily. It wouldn't be better or as a member. But I would just make things, see how to make additional things happen, get additional traffic and so forth. All of it can be justified by doing great, I make tons of money, et cetera, et cetera. But I know the difference. And what's fascinating was I called it in advance purely based on something where basically everyone else would have denied it, like the reality of it. But it's just reality. A certain level, again, the decluttering, the maintaining the sense of importance is going to lead your mind to see things. Just like if you think shoes are important, you'll see them at a party. And if your mind implicitly doesn't, you just won't see what they're wearing. You won't remember, period. And what your mind determines importance from the sum total of what's implied to it, period. So you imply that it's not important in various ways, and it will get that, and it will be part of its processing. So decluttering will obviously let you see better, just simplistically, and it will let your mind, it'll let you dictate what your mind sees as important, right? If there's not clutter, if your mind's pointed at one thing or less things, then it won't be so cluttered in terms of what feels important to it. So just even a simplistic idea of seeing and decluttering will take you a long way. Number 3, avoid closure. All right, this is a big one, and it's one that people screw up like nuts, like crazy. Because people mistakenly, by default, think that they want closure rather than to win. All right, my attitude towards winning is quite unique. I'm not saying totally unique or whatever, but just it's not default. It's not normal. If you want to win, then you don't see, you can either feel like you're winning and greatly reduce your chances of winning, or you can ignore the importance of feeling like you're winning or feeling like you're making obvious progress in the sense of like final result stuff, and win. Right? You can date looking to actually figure out and get your vision and make real your vision for a relationship, or you can feel like you're awesome and attractive and so amazing already. And it's basically one or the other. You can have creative breakthroughs and you can creatively engage and see more that's going to lead to all kinds of helpful stuff for you by seeing more solutions and more opportunities, seeing what's important to a person that would be a great relationship partner to you who you're very attracted to. You won't see what's important if you think you already know. Right? And by default, you're going to feel like, well, what's important to you, plus a few things you feel like are important to women, right? Or whatever, if you're a guy, or if you're with a woman of either, however gender you are. If you just don't think you already got it until you already have won, and with a relationship you've never won, right? You can be on a good fat path, and that's pretty nice, right? It's it's easy to stay on it, right? But what's important to someone can change, and there can be things you still haven't realized, right? Just be creatively engaged with the idea of what's important to, and it's good practice, right? Both ways. Like if you're creatively engaged with what's important for yourself overall, then it's easy to think about what's important to other people, right? It kind of rolls off the tongue, so to speak, rolls off the mind, or whatever. So whatever it takes to avoid closure. Here's another thing. You know how the people talk about don't get too comfortable. You don't want to be comfortable, right? Being comfortable isn't the problem. Closure is the problem, and they're sometimes related, all right? So if you're in a job and you're comfortable, the problem isn't being comfortable in the job. The problem, it's associated, right? The comfortable and closure. But if you can manage to avoid closure, like let's say you're comfortable, but you have a really vivid vision for how awesome it would be to be wealthy, all right? where you wouldn't have to argue about money or kind of argue about money-related things or budgeting with your partner, right? Maybe you can't buy a spaceship, right? But you're wealthy, whatever that means. Can't buy whatever you want ever, right? That's not a good definition. But where you're basically fine, you don't have to do things that are important just because other people want you to and so forth for money. So if you have a really compelling vision for you, if that works for you, you can be comfortable in a job but have a compelling vision, right? Here's an analogy that's not based on morality. I'm not making a moral suggestion, but you can imagine being comfortable with a relationship partner, content, and yet see someone that really does it for you, or meet someone that really does it for you, and really still being very motivated to go after that person. Right? I'm not suggesting to have that happen to yourself. I'm not talking about myself at all. I'm very excited about my wife and so on. But that still, that mental image can help you see how comfortable isn't the problem. It's really the relative motivational difference between what you're envisioning, right? So you don't feel closure. You feel openness or a useful tension, right? A useful motivation, right? Do you feel motivated? Is your mind going to build what it needs to see what you need, right? So there's a go-to illustration, right? With the, you're with someone, you're comfortable, but then you find someone you're really motivated by. So you can be comfortable in a job and still get wealthy. But you need to find something, a vision that motivates you, so you don't feel closure. You don't feel comfortable in a way that closes you off. You're looking to see if the thing you need to have creative breakthroughs about feels important to you. If it doesn't, then check 1, 2, and 3. Right? If it's not important, you're not going to see. And also, you don't want to feel like you don't want to have something kind of obscure your sight with closure or cluttering, like the way with you can picture like a mother and a son, and how she doesn't see what he cares about so much because she has already in her mind what he needs, right? You can get to what the person needs even better if you're also creatively engaged with the person. It's not obscuring your sight. It can help you see the overall result you want to get to, where they eat their vegetables and so forth, but creatively engage rather than think you already know the answer. And of course, if you're kind of snapping at someone or getting angry or frustrated a lot, then you're not creatively engaged. Right? You think you already know the answer. That's why you're frustrated. You think you know the path already. All that's closure. You're not frustrated or angry or whatever or bored if you're creatively engaged. Whenever you think you know what you don't, when you have fabricated certainty that you've bought into about how fast you should accomplish something, what the path is to accomplish it, whether someone should just get what you're saying or just do what you're saying, all that stuff. That's fabricated certainty, and it gets in the way of seeing what you need to see and building what you need to build to see what you need to see. But sometimes you might build what you need, right? We can easily add to the illustration of the lookout tower to see more of the city or the countryside. If there's something in front of your lens, right, then that's going to mess you. Or if there's too much going on, you might not see what you need to see on the countryside, right? You're trying to spot, somebody sneaking in, but there's a zillion people. You can't spot them because it's cluttered, right? Whatever's going to get in the way of you seeing what you need to see. Either not having built what you need to build and or clutter or closure or not feeling important, all that. So you maintain an environment that's going to make you feel like what you need to see is important, that you need to build to see it. Building is important, right, conceptually, and it can be learning is building, especially if you're creatively engaged with what you're learning. Again, you're not just thinking you'll already know it when you see it, right? Learning can lead to fabricated certainty, but it can also lead to things that you know, and that's where understanding the difference is critical. It's epistemology. I mentioned epistemology for years, so you may already have been creatively engaged about epistemology for hundreds of hours and figured a lot of stuff out. You don't need me as a source. The more you think you need me as a source, the more you won't creatively engage until I talk about it. Of course, it's great to interact and listen to my webinars when I do talk about it. It's obvious. Okay, I'm about done here with the monologue. Anything that's going to give you more angles and more perspectives, I can expand on this probably just next webinar. But in a sense, if you engage creatively with number 4, you'll get a lot just from that one phrase, right? So number 4 is kind of a positive, proactive thing, right, where that'll help you see more, look at it from different ways. The more you read, the more you will naturally see more perspectives about what other people are thinking. Right? Think about it. Right? Reading will give you different perspectives. Get you in other people's heads. Right? If you imagine you're the other person, I talked about this in mind reading, I think number 20 in alchemy. Right? I gave you ways to look at things from additional perspectives. So you like if you try to see what's important to someone else, right, you can think, well, what would help me to build more knowledge? Well, I could talk to them, right? But you can, yes, that's true. That's correct, and that's part of what you should do. The other thing, but sometimes you can't, and that's not the only thing you want to do. An example of seeing things from more angles and perspectives, so talk to them as one angle and perspective, what they themselves say is important. But that's not going to be the only thing. Another thing could be look at what they do, right? Look at what they invest in or what they show is important to them by their actions. Look at what they get pissed off about someone else doing, right? Or look at things that someone might do that you might feel like are importantly bad or importantly good, and the other person doesn't have a big reaction, pro or con. Well, that's a good clue on, right? If something moves you, like you feel like it's particularly good or bad that a third party did, right? If Mary did something really good or bad, in your opinion, important, then you and Joe both see what Mary did. By paying attention to Joe's response, you get a good sense, you get an additional angle that'll help you see more, right, of what's important to Joe, right? You assume that it's probably important, in general, to everyone, if you think it's important what Mary did, good or bad. If it doesn't move Joe, if he's like, whatever, now that gives you insight into what's important to him, not that, right? And you could think, why? I wonder why. What's different in our culture, upbringing, or experiences. And that can give you, right, that's more that you know, right, as you ask questions like that. You know the question at least, right? So, and then thinking of that being them, being in their relationship situation, their business situation, whatever you know about them, and imagine being them, that's another perspective. Right? Whatever gives you more angles and perspectives. Going out and looking at retail stores and just gives you thoughts about products. You'll be able, it'll expand your angles and perspectives on stuff. If you just go look around Walmart, just wander around the store. I'm not even talking about like scanning items and seeing what they sell for. Just looking at them, right? And during your life, if you make it important. Feel like important, like if you're creatively engaged with thinking about products, you think about what you could use that's hard to find, or that you can find it, but there'll be a marketing page that would appeal to you that you don't see being used, like on Amazon when you search for it, right? Like a framing for a product, that would be good. Right? So you creatively go about your day, you're noticing stuff that you use, that you might want, that's hard to find, right? Or you see something that your friends are interested in. Right, or you're at an event. Like Liz is creatively engaged with that kind of thing, and so you can see she spots that stuff. I never think of what would be a good Amazon product. I'm not creatively engaged in it. I'm not suggesting, I'm pointing out that if you don't intentionally do it, it's not going to happen automatically, right, in a lot of cases. Right? I don't create the conditions, but I have lots of other creative breakthroughs and thoughts, right, and things I design. And this kind of blueprint is how. All right, excellent. That will cover it for now. I'm not exactly sure what I'll do in the next webinar. If I'll go into more about this, which I probably will. I might do partly this and partly accelerated learning. I'll see over the week. But excellent. All right, guys. So there's probably comments in the meantime, but let me just ask you this. Was that unique? Did that give you a unique perspective on creativity that's going to be actionable? Oh, Faith already said 56 minutes ago. Wow. I was looking at how to create a formula for this. Brilliant and timely. Excellent. Did this give you a formula that you feel like you can use, Faith? I'm not sure how well. Another thing I might do next time is address some of these same comments and questions for you guys. I'm a little bit spent for today after doing that for 2 hours. Incredible from Faith. Yes, it's terrific. Amazing webinar. Incredible from Shema. First time I was able to actively follow in the month. Yeah, I told you this webinar would be accessible, right? Like that was one of the things that I've told you in the past where I'm aware that I'm talking about stuff where it's going to help you see more, but like I'm building with you guys, but it's not like kind of give you the closure that everyone kind of, including myself, we like to kind of get all the way to the win. A lot of times in a webinar, I can't take you from seeing a whole new idea and question to giving you closure with answering it and how to apply it and integrate it, right? We make great progress looking back, and each one's important. But this, and then I also tell you that sometimes with certain topics, we could do it if I had the right topic. But I don't look for those topics. I look for what you need rather than what, you pat me on the back for. But this just happens to intersect. So this is going to be really useful for you, but it's also going to give you closure and probably be fun and nice for you guys. You're getting close to what we've learned already. Exactly. I referred to a lot of things I've covered in the past. Those of you who have followed along with my recent webinar series, or any of them, right, would have more background and you'd see more of what I was saying. Brilliant from Julia. Great. Shema says this topic seems key with motivation. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, very important with motivation. This, I basically don't think about motivation. I think about this. I think about creative engagement. I think about what implies that something is important to my mind, not decluttering, not having closure, having a vision about what's important, understanding the R in the results talks about understanding your goal better, which can change, right? But only if it's beyond a reasonable doubt that you should change your goal. Right? So you have clarity about the result you want, and then you can often get it and then move along to a new thing. Or there could be new information that gives you additional clarity, right? It might tweak it. It might. Adrian Joseph said, very good, David, excellent. Adrian said this up with a lot of ideas for me, made me see more. Yes, what Shema said was Zach. Yeah. Yeah, this is one of those that even like new people, if I gave this to new people, they would stick with me easier. Right? Megan says, very helpful. Actionable plus. Thanks, David. Creativity is very relatable. It's something I want. Yeah, I don't even know if a lot of people realize how much they want it. I think that even the topic is not a super hot button for people because they don't quite know what it applies to. Or maybe they just think about making cool collages for the teacher at school, or something. But in the way that I'm talking about it, it's just pivotal and central for your life and just makes everything so much easier when you can reliably duplicate it with a formula. Shema said, I so get now why I'm not able to focus on the business to the degree I feel I should. Amen. Awesome. That's just wonderful. Not amen like I want you to realize it, but a lot of people you can realize about the closure, what you're implying is important, the clutter, right? And, there's a few principles. You really want to creatively engage with these couple of principles about the ability to see things must be built, and your mind's only going to build and see based on what it thinks is important, right? And it picks up what's important from what's normal in the environment. I spend a lot of time alone out of necessity because the things I'm thinking about don't feel important to other people to start out with. Once I do this webinar in this particular one, it can feel important to you, but obviously this kind of stuff doesn't feel important to people to spend hours and hours on each day, typically. Whoops. Yeah. Oops, back to where we go. Marcia says, yes, thank you, David. Janine says, amazing to have a reliable formula for creativity, which previously felt like a very nebulous, unpredictable concept. A lot of clarity, right? So you feel like it's clear what it is, why it's important, and how to do it, right? What, when, and how. What it is, when to use it, which is pretty much all the time, and how to use it. Great. Marcia, Brian, incredible insights. David, told you guys to stick with me, right? How did I see this webinar? What to say? By doing the two previous ones. Lots of other stuff, but if I hadn't done the two previous ones, right, which were good in their way, but wouldn't be this kind of crowd pleaser and actionable stuff. How do we get to where we can see it or where I can see it to give to you? I do those, you see? But when it's so different in life, when You don't need to see something right away and you know what you can do. You know what I mean? Often I think people panic or give up, or they don't always. They might work through it, but it's so much effort, right? It's like your willpower and your motivation and everything is just to get yourself to where you can wander around long enough to where you see what you need to see. When you see it as a formula that's reliable on how it works based on simple, clear principles, then you no longer need like willpower, perseverance in that way. You don't need to emotionally push in order to proceed when you can't see, right? Because you just apply this formula and the blueprint, and you will see, but you will build, and your brain will do it all for you, and you'll see it work. Just without even a real deep understanding, this will work for you really well, right? With a deep understanding, it can only help, but it'll just kind of a surface understanding of what I said will probably work pretty well, and give you motivation to pay attention when I talk about the more deeper stuff. Incredible insights, David. This is an actionable frame to apply to everything. I really needed this and need to listen again. Oh, why do you see more from the same webinar when you listen to it again? Because automatically when you listen to it the first time, something gets built. Of course, I've talked about that in terms of frameworks, but it's this principle, right? Your mind builds, and then you see more from the same exact webinar. And remember, I talked about, we think by default we see what's there intuitively. We don't think of it that way. We don't talk about it that way, but and so intuitively you think, I've heard every word David said, right? And I can't even feel, sometimes you might even feel like you understood a lot of what I said. Sometimes not. But even webinars where you felt like you understood, you watch it again of mine, and it's like a whole new webinar, right, a lot of times. Why? Why do you see all new stuff? This exact principle. You see, life is like this, and when you can rely on it, it's night and day, right? It's like not only is seeing new things really helpful, like not only is the benefit of creativity and creative engagement a big, but the benefit of knowing you can rely on it is a whole nother amazing benefit. So you get both benefits as you creatively engage with this yourself. Soon you'll really feel like you can rely on this. You probably already feel it pretty well. Like this, it's the kind of thing where, but you'll feel it even more, where you can rely. And it's amazing when you feel like you can rely on creativity. I'm telling you, we have a joking term for it, but the reason there's a term for it is because it's so reliable. We call it brilliance on demand. And Mike jokes, he'll say, I want brilliance on demand, but it happens time and again, and it's the same process. I start out not seeing the answer at all, not knowing what to write in the email, not knowing what to do about this, that, or the other thing. But then I just, we can, on the surface, it looks like talking through it, but I engage with it in a certain way where I end up building knowledge. I kind of take another thing you could, go-to phrase that might help you is you take, and they do this in detective novels sometimes, you take an inventory of what you know, and what you'll find is when you start taking an inventory of what you know, you'll keep adding to it. Because you'll take an inventory of what you know and you'll instantly see something, and you'll, without knowing what I just said, you'll think, oh, I already knew that too. I already knew that too. But you actually didn't know it. You didn't see it until you wrote down the first few things that you know, and then you'll see more. You'll feel like you always knew it, but you wouldn't have seen it until you wrote down the first few things that you know. So you start, this is why I say the law of application. You begin with what you know. You have to learn to distinguish, and I'll dwell on this soon. But you start with what you know. It keeps building. It's like magic, so to speak. You think you won't see the next thing, but you do. You just keep on seeing more that you actually know if you stick there. But when you switch to trying to see what you don't know directly, akin to staying on the first floor and trying to see the whole city, all right, what you don't know, that leads to a downward spiral. So the law of implication, if you stick to that path, leads to an upward spiral of things you know, and you keep seeing more that you know, and you never need to get off it. See, people intuitively, they're so used to looking at where they don't know, like standing on the first floor and looking out and trying to see more. They're so used to that they think that if they just stick with what they know, they won't see enough. So they have to go to what they don't know. This is the whole circular block that people have. What's actually true in life is you can keep on building on what you know and never stop. It'll give you everything. People feel so sure when they hear law of implication, that statement, not that brand name, but the statement about start with what you know and build and keep building. They're sure that I must mean that you really just start guessing about what you don't know, or finding a way to look at gray area and make it black and white. But you actually never need to do that. And actually, if you do try to do that, it's like you fall into the water, like with Peter walking on the water with Jesus, where he doubts and he falls. He can't walk in the water anymore. You start doubting and looking where you don't know and trying to know it directly, downward spiral with creativity. And then the downward spiral, because now you're functionally acting stupid, and then you all the more need to feel like you're smart, right? And you make less money, and then you're desperate for money, and you're in a rush, and it's a downward spiral with trying to focus on what you don't know. And all the attendant advice. Oh, your guts will tell you, trust your intuition, blah, blah, blah. You'll know it when you see it. It's all the downward spiral. When you really get that the law of application works one day, it's unbelievable, unbelievable. Faith says, I have to ask what I've been doing. I have to ask what have I been doing has been implying certain goals are unimportant to my mind. That is keeping me from acting on it. I have to ask that, okay, I think what Faith is saying is, she's saying, I, Faith, have to ask myself, what have I been doing and what in my environment is implying to my mind, kind of insidiously and invisibly, that what's really important isn't, right? For example, like getting creatively engaged with that which is important or even that which is true, or figuring out what's true, distinguishing what's true. Those two topics are important. Everyone everywhere is implying to you that those topics are not important because they're always thinking about something other than those two things. Even if someone's trying to think about what's important, they think they'll know it when they see it, right? They don't think about how to see what's important, you know? So great, exactly, great, Faith. Excellent question, excellent point. Everyone should do that. Jay says, brilliant. And as always, David, you stretched my mind with some of your amazing concepts. Mind blown. Thanks so much for all your work you put in developing your topics. You're welcome, and I do put a lot of time into it. I'll probably do that anyway, and I happen to enjoy that, but I also do it for you guys. When I have webinars, I do it a lot more. So it's a win-win, but I also do it for you, and appreciation works great. Shema, David, I've been decluttering for 2 years now, closing loops since LOI, and I just recently, more creative engagement is happening for business opportunities. Wonderful. Yeah, great. The decluttering all by itself is like a magic wand, right? But you accept that it can also be like a combination lock where you do one part of the formula and not the other parts, and you still get blocked by something else, so be careful. So excellent, but I'm so glad that you're recently, you see the effect. I'm glad you're seeing the effect of decluttering. I would expect that, and that's wonderful. This formula or blueprint or whatever you call it, that list of 3 things to not make sure you don't have happen to your mind, right? It's like a garden. You need to add a little bit, and you need to keep pests from screwing it up, you know. You need to keep from overwatering, underwatering, things like that. So you keep from 3 things, and you do the 1 thing. Lawrence says, I feel like this is exactly what I need to keep breaking through. You feel correct. It is. But then again, I say that about every insight you share with us. Well, they're all logically related. Removing failure conditions. That is what this is. I'm just getting specific with you about creativity. You know, understanding what's important, distinguishing how to know what's true from what you don't know. That's critical for this anyway, right? And what was the original apotheosis idea? Fabricated certainty, and how you don't, that whether that closure it caused you, right? That's because they're all logically related. Suleiman says, today's webinar gives more clarity to the X plus Y equals Z idea. Thanks. Yeah, exactly. I mention that from time to time, that things are mixing, and we often think that we're looking at X when we're actually seeing Z, and we're seeing like X modified by something, and we don't realize that, and so forth. If you didn't understand that, then don't worry too much right now, or don't get upset. Alan says, but of course, other webinars, creative engagement, and so forth can help you see what I mean. Alan says, my current focus is the importance of importance. And this webinar has given me a lot of extra angles on that. Excellent. And I can testify, as I did, that in practice, that's what I do. If I'm not creatively engaged on something specific, I tend to realize that and try to think about what would have impact to think about. And it also means I organize my environment in a certain way where it's related to what's going to have impact, and it gets to be a whole positive, virtuous cycle with focusing on what is impact, and it gets rid of it automatically gets rid of negative thoughts without having, you see, it's constantly a go-to idea, a correct heuristic or way of doing things, that you want to dissolve negative stuff, not swamp it with good stuff. This is true in so many ways. With relationships, you don't want to do stuff that really pisses people off and try to swamp it out with flowers. You just want to not, do that stuff. But with negative thoughts, I don't try to overcome them with a positive mindset or positive thoughts. Instead, I dissolve negative thoughts by creatively engaging. When you're creatively engaged, there's no environment for negative thoughts. There's no point in it, especially when you're creatively engaged and you know that it works. Where's the worry? Where's the negative? Right? It's very rare. It can happen when you have the wrong kind of whole set of ingredients for a few moments, but you know what's causing it. You get recreatively engaged in the bottleneck, and you're all set. What are good books to learn more about epistemology? Just about nothing. You pretty much have to hear it from me in practice. But there is a book called Not a Chance, N-O-T space A space C-H-A-N-C-E, by R period initial C period Sproul, S-P-R-O-U-L, that kind of happened to give me a breakthrough about that helped. Talks about, he calls it a diatribe against chance. Not my son, of course, but the concept. The only answer to epistemology that's really good that I know of is the one that I kind of know, and so I'll get into it. I think I've prepared things better now to get into it properly. I think there's something about this creative breakthrough, this webinar, that will really change things when it comes to that, me talking about it directly. Plus, now that we have the remove failure conditions and the fabricated certainty, the apotheosis idea and the Ragnarok idea, as I call them, then I think we've set the table properly finally for it. That's going to allow us to see the importance of it and therefore also see the concepts themselves when I talk about it. I've talked about it directly in the past, but I think we can all have a better experience now. Mike says I plan for brilliance on demand, but that's the thing with the creativity formula blueprint that I gave you. You can plan on it. It's the craziest thing. You don't necessarily put a deadline on it, but you plan on it. Right? You don't exactly try to abuse it, but yeah. But when you do abuse it, it still works. I'm going to start planning for it more and more. Yeah, exactly. Right. John says, yes, build on what you know, opens up doors. Exactly. And it's a lot like building a tower to see more of the countryside. You'll just keep seeing more and more that you know, especially, again, once you can distinguish. The first thing you need to know is how to distinguish what you know from what you don't, and I'll work on that soon with you. Gary says, oh, God, the law of implication works. Thanks. That is amazing. Ha, ha, ha. That's funny. Lucas says, my mind not finding the right things important may be the largest bottleneck in my life. Of course it is. That or epistemology, one of those two are at the root of everything else. Not being able to distinguish what you know from what's fabricated certainty that your mind tells you that you know, and then not being able to spot impactful things. Again, you don't need to figure out the most impactful thing for you to do at every moment. Just the reason is it's the same because you only have to win, right? It's like that. If I said you have to figure out the most important thing, it'd be like saying you have to be perfect. It'd be like saying you have to find the perfect woman out of all the women on the planet. The only way you could do that is to have like intimate, so to speak, knowledge of every woman on the planet, right? So it's not most. It's you figure out like what you need and get it in there. And then you basically eyeball as best you can, right? But when you kind of build a decent framework for seeing what's impactful in your life, and then you eyeball it, I mean, it's pretty quick and easy to do things that are impactful. Plus, as I told you, I mean, start with epistemology and understanding importance itself. Mike says, interesting that pests are drawn to weaknesses and have a role in the economy of farming. They're part of a larger context. Yep. Bryce says, David, I want to go deeper into the chess analogy. I'm by no means an expert, but the painful lessons I've learned from the game have been caused maybe by my impulses. I've had countless times where I quickly would move pieces that aren't ideal to do at the beginning like my queen. Other times I would follow a way too passive approach. Well, here's the thing, is you don't improve at chess by just trying to concentrate better necessarily in the moment, right, or pay more attention. You need a lattice work. You need knowledge and experience of a good sort that you gain without closure, right, that will allow you to see more. Again, my kind of go-to analogy keeps being useful. You don't stand at level 1 and try to see harder. You build or create, or if the tower is built for you, then you need to create the conditions for it to be built for you. Let's say it was a tree, right? Then you grow and you climb and you see. Then you create the conditions, you plant a seed, and you have the conditions for the tree to grow, and then you can climb it and see farther. There's a good kind of mixing a couple analogies to kind of get probably a decent go-to illustration. So there you go. XYR is such an awesome formula and so understandable. Yeah, especially when you relate it to relationships, right? And maybe some other things to help see it, what I mean. Dave Keys says, somehow I went through this in 2017 trying to see directly what I didn't know. Yeah. No, everyone does it. It's so common. It's so normal. But don't do it. And then illness pushed me the rest of the way into a downward spiral. You lost every client, started rebuilding, less cluttered. I'm a third of the way back now in income, fewer clients, better deals. It's difficult to explain, but LOI guided me. And yes, it's a lot more like going easily downhill. So glad to hear it, David, that you're coming through that. And glad to hear that I was right all along. But I'm of course kidding. But again, I'm glad I see what I see now. I would have explained this to you in this way earlier, but I didn't see it until I built to it. Right? But I did it on purpose. I did these webinars partly, as I've said before, I know enough that sharing what I know and how to explain it already is going to be helpful, but it would help me to see by doing the webinars. And then I have breakthroughs from time to time, like particular ones. This webinar, again, the apotheosis concept, at least for me, with the fabricated certainty, the idea of Ragnarok, as well, with Ragnarok is to remove failure conditions until you win. Exit analogy of pests and negative thoughts. You don't need to eliminate them, just understand they point to a weakness in the overall terrain or context. Yeah, I don't try to eliminate them directly, right? I don't like chase after every bug or ant to try to swat it. You try to create some sort of condition where you don't have to do that, right? And you don't like overwhelm ants with like some insect that doesn't eat your crops, right? You try to get rid of the ants, you try to dissolve what's leading to the ants one way or the other. You don't just try to have more other stuff or grow more crops to swamp out the ants or whatever, right? Dave says, and I understood it well that we live in a universe of reasons when you spoke about that. Oh, killer, that's beautiful. That's very good that you understand that. That means you have a lot built to understand that. Shema said, it's really helping to hear you give little summaries of what the overall theme has been with each of the LOI series. Alchemy, apotheosis. And alchemy, one of the overall themes is related to chunking, right? Chunking up, chunking down, and so forth. Liliana says, knowledge is inventory for accountability, right? Like taking an inventory of your knowledge. Creativity for engagement, results for reliability, happiness, abundance, impact with every step. So a few keywords to summarize some things, Liliana. Thank you. You're very welcome, Liliana. And smart to give kind of some keywords for yourself. Keywords won't necessarily help someone else that doesn't know this stuff. Of course, that's not your point. I'm just pointing this out to you in terms of learning. But they're very helpful. So how helpful they might be for another person would be variable. But for you, it's great to have put these keywords now that, since you've already heard the webinar and they're keywords for you. Bryce says, isn't a PhD fulfilled by seeing something that is needed to be built while being dependent in an authority figure's opinion? Yeah, one of the things I was thinking this earlier, randomly enough, that what goes on in school is often the why, the thing that you need to like find the answer to, you need to match it to like what the professor wants. So they professors, I think they actually believe this, that they're like, no, you need to write a good paper, right? You need to, follow the academic rules. What you actually have to do in practice is match their views, which are not all correct. They're not all stupid, but they're not all correct. And so they're basically arbitrary with relates to with what's right or wrong. Like in philosophy class, if I had to write a philosophy paper, right, I couldn't figure out what good philosophy was. I had to figure out what good philosophy meant to my professor, which had no bearing on actual reality or clear thinking. And that's very difficult to figure out, right, given my access, like the limited access. And especially you're supposed to figure it out from like day one because you get graded and they all get compiled. And he forms an opinion of you from the first paper. So really what they end up doing with PhD programs and school in general is they end up filtering. They call it intelligence and so forth, but it's not that at all. It's merely how well people match the overall worldview, kind of the implicit worldview. On the surface, you can differ, but it has to be just in special ways that you can differ and argue with the professor. In every other way, you're supposed to be the same. And they don't even tell you what it is, so they end up filtering just for people that are kind of culturally like them in the way that they care about. And that's it. It's not intelligence, it's nothing. And of course, you know, these days that end up approximating towards like liberal, American, Western liberal progressivism for the most part, and they view people that don't have that as stupid, immoral, you know, and so forth. Without realizing, like they themselves don't really realize they're doing that. That's why I don't try to become a professor. By their definition, I'm stupid. Shema, yes, because I don't, you know, match their worldview exactly. Shema says, yes, decluttering just in itself was not enough, hence why this Webby is such a huge breakthrough. Oh, yeah, and related to what I said before, exactly. It's like a combination block of blocks sometimes. You need to get them all. It looks like the first block is helpful. Sometimes it'll remove enough that you can see some light at the end of the tunnel or some results. But sometimes you remove a block, and this is part of my problem is I become aware of these, and you need them, but you won't see the results right away necessarily, or even the relevance. Often you will, but sometimes you won't, or you guys will, but the people that watch my webinars and then stop watching might not. Although lots of people watch the webinars and replays. I don't mean to say that people don't. Very normal to watch them. Okay, good. Excellent. But that combination lock idea is an important mental image because you can genuinely remove a block, but you don't get the result unless you remove several, like multiple blocks sometimes in life. Lauren says, I'm still not seeing the building on what you know thing. Yeah, I agree. I definitely need to explain that specifically. I wouldn't expect you to necessarily figure that out yet. It's helpful if you, the more you creatively engage with it on your own before I get to it, the better you got, all you guys. And I will definitely talk about, because of this now, I think we can talk about epistemology. All right. Greg says, thank you for taking the time for these webinars. I feel like I'm getting a better view of philosophy from you than from the years of studying it in college. Oh, I'm glad that someone who studied philosophy in college still likes me and doesn't think they know it all. That's great. Can't wait to hear more about your thoughts on epistemology. Mimicking professors was the key to success in most classes. Exactly, and I couldn't even quite figure out fast enough how to do that in some cases, right? Because I was pretty so far from their worldview. Eventually, you know, you can, but you kind of have to do it fast or else, you know, you're kind of on the wrong track. Jason says, first seeing Mike Long work and then you explain it. I've turned to gathering building blocks for creativity. Great, that's a great, it's like correct or a great approximation, or however you want to think of it. Now this concept on creatively engaging seems to bring things that I didn't have in my process. Yeah, I think there's a real sense of kind of overall completeness to this. I'm sure there's more breakthroughs to be had and more distinctions, but there's kind of an overall thing about this formula that I gave you, kind of like with business, where product, traffic, conversion overall really covers it, and there's lots to be figured out within that paradigm. But this gives an overall paradigm for creativity based on principles to like ideas and how they interact and stuff, that when you do something like that, you know, that has like an overall correctness to it, where we can mostly look kind of within it for more. Faith Jones says, 100% I learned what the professors wanted and gave it to them. Brilliant, Faith. And the problem was they swear to the blue in the face that you can't do that. And what I did was I took so much kind of hard sciences and stuff that I didn't have the experience with humanities to set me up to figure that out before college and then forget about it. My one bad grade was philosophy because I couldn't get their point of view. That's hilarious, Faith, and you're one of the greatest, most open people with it, you know, once again, so hilarious. Yeah, they really didn't like when I was interested in actually solving the, like, to them, the idea that I had, like I took it for granted that you want to solve the question of epistemology, that you want to figure out how to know what's true and how to distinguish it from what you don't know. To them, that in and of itself was heresy. So there was like there was no way to have a meeting in the mind. I was that, like the idea of not wanting to solve the very question of epistemology. Like it's one of the three branches of academic philosophy is epistemology. The other two are metaphysics and I think ethics. If I have that right, I think that's correct. But the starting point for epistemology in academia is that it's appalling to think of actually solving it. And I can't wrap my head around that. It's so inherently contradictory that it's just impossible. Like, It's just too ridiculous for me. Faith says, this webinar actually made the rationale for building on what you know much clearer for me. Yeah, excellent. I know I needed to do that. But like, I knew I needed to explain it, but how do you go about it? You need to build the lattice work, the framework, right? And in other words, the creative, you need to build to where you can see what I'm saying. And now you guys can understand even better that if you ask me to explain something directly, right, it's like, again, like standing on the first floor and saying, could you please point out this building that you can only see if you build a lookout tower or climb to the top. So there's just building that has to be done to understand some of the things I'm talking about, that there's nothing I can do if we don't kind of build it together. Even if I build it with you, the problem is if it feels unimportant while I'm doing it, then I can't, you know, then it kind of makes it hard. And it's hard to talk to when you feel like people definitely don't sense the importance. John says, I'll definitely have to watch the replay. Yeah, if you see the comments here, for sure, right? Such a great Q&A, David and everyone. Thank you all. You're very welcome. Yeah, you're lucky to avoid a liberal arts degree in college. Yeah, I didn't have to take any of those courses. And philosophy I took with continuing ed after I graduated. But I was thinking of going for my PhD at the time, but I gave up on that. There's no way. Couldn't hold it together for years trying to do that. Best decision ever, truly compliments. Compliments LOI, the engineering best decision ever is what Rice is referring to it. And engineering compliments LOI, excellent. Yeah, with bottlenecks and all kinds of stuff. By the way, one more last hint as I go here. When I talked in the past about building scenarios, this will shed a lot more light on what I've talked about. You build a frame, you build, which enables you to see better. When you build out a scenario in your mind, you're kind of taking inventory of what you know in kind of a pseudo-tangible way in your mind, and you will see more as you build a scenario. If you just think highlights, like when you associate in your mind, when people by default will often free associate and say, oh, that reminds me of this, that reminds me of this. And just their thinking is they jump from one association to the next. That does not build for you to see more. All you're doing there is just, like it's brainstorming. You can stumble across seeing something that way. It's not like always completely not helpful, but what it can do is it can prevent you from doing something that's mostly more effective. A little bit of free associating is no problem, but really you want to, free associating is a little bit like looking out a window. Like you climb up a certain height, you look out the window and see if you see enough. And you look for a little while to see if you do, and if you don't, or let's say you're a lookout for like an army or a castle, you know, someone's going to attack and you're looking out for spies or an advanced troops or the opposing army or whatever, right? Then you might climb up and see if you see enough, or you might use a certain telescope and see if it's good enough, and if it's not, you make another one. So as I talk now, I'm realizing brainstorming is kind of like that, or free associating, or just relaxing and listening to your thoughts. That's actually very helpful as part of the process, but it's analogous to like looking out the window after climbing for a bit, or looking out of your glass, or looking in your microscope after you've shaved the lenses to a certain magnification and seeing if you see what you need to. And it totally is important to stop and kind of listen to your mind and see what you see after you've built to a certain degree, right? That kind of listening, you can play some classical music, you can just eat or drink coffee and not be reading something else or doing something else, and just let your mind wander or kind of get in an alpha state or whatever it is, and listen to your mind and notice the images it's giving you. That's totally relevant as part of the process of like building and looking. So there you go. But when people just start free associating before they build, that's when it's particularly a little bit pointless. And also if you're free associating and just listening and you're not getting the answer or getting close, then you need to build more, you know. Universities are turning out crypto communist propaganda these days. No doubt. See clearly how extortion is the poison of the root of liberalism. Yeah, I saw that by building to it, you know, and so forth. Okay, great. Okay, I love you guys. Awesome stuff. And I will be back next week, and we will continue with something that's along the path. We'll I might look up any of the comments in the middle of the webinar that I didn't get to, talk a bit about some more ways to look at different perspectives, and then maybe that'll be the next webinar. Maybe we'll do a little Q&A, maybe even reports. Maybe this week you'll be able to report back to me on some stuff. questions, applications, successes, breakthroughs, whatever. So let's default to that if there's nothing else that really intercedes. That'll be kind of plan A. I'll look at some questions. I'll have some more things to teach to get to, and then we can also have a little bit of maybe some reports and feedback that way. And then that'll give you an extra week, and then I'll go into some specifics with accelerated learning that'll be pretty actionable, and then we'll get into epistemology and how to distinguish what you know from what you not, how to not fall for fabricated certainty in the wrong way that gives you the wrong kind of closure and keeps you from creatively engaging and so forth. That'll be kind of probably as I'll end up, and I'll kind of deal with that as long as I need to until I feel like we got it. And that'll probably be this webinar series, unless there's some other major topic that occurs to me. All right, guys, awesome. You're very welcome, guys. Very, very welcome. Thanks for all the engagement and attendance. That it definitely helps me engage. Oh, think about the creative process. If you're me, do you want a bunch of people interacting with you on a weekly basis and hearing what you have to say, right? And not wanting you to sound silly if you don't know anything and you haven't thought of anything during the week, right? What's that imply? Does that imply to my mind that it's important to help me creatively engage? Especially, the other thing about not thinking that you're your mind and realizing it's done for you with the building is by not thinking that you can do it yourself, it forces you to attend to the conditions, right? Like if I think that I make the plant myself, then I might not worry about watering it, having sunlight, and keeping pests. I think I can just directly do it myself. So people think they can just be creative regardless of conditions. When you embrace the fact that you can't be creative yourself in one sense, that your mind has to do a lot of it, right? Then it forces you to pay attention to creating the right conditions for it. And it doesn't give you closure or clutter you with thinking that you can do it a different way. So that's a good ending thing. Hope everyone heard that and didn't sign off. Oh, actually, yeah, no one's gotten off in the last few minutes. So great. Oh, Brigando. Is that a different language? Or? You're very welcome. The path to engage creative enlightenment. Absolutely, exactly. Take care, guys, and I'll talk to you next week. I'd love to have you on next week with some engagement or reports or whatever, so that'd be wonderful. Portuguese, excellent. You're very welcome, Shema. So great, and you see how you guys help me. And it's a way that I benefit from these webinars, and it's part of a mutual circular upward spiral virtuous cycle benefit where you guys coming in and being involved with me, creatively engaged and attending and everything, implies to my own mind, right? Because I can't be creative, right? My mind does it. I need to create the conditions, and you guys are a big part of that, so thank you. All right. Take care all. Excellent. Great example of importance. Yeah, exactly. I'm really glad I thought of that example.